It was impossible to believe, but the heroine's mother got married, and to the head of the best kingdom of Denik, the venerable Duke of Orleans. Her mother, with a sweet smile, called marriage the true happiness she had finally found after 4 marriages, but she said this before she knew anything, because she could hardly have imagined that she, her beloved son and her only daughter, every single one of them, would be dead in one night. The children were doomed to be killed by their evil stepfather, who mercilessly burst into their room on an ordinary night. In order to somehow avoid the tragedy and prevent this, the heroine insisted on not getting married, assuring that she and her brother and mother could simply live happily together, and she tried in every way to tell her. The mother did not listen to her daughter, and when she said these words, she only laughed in response and assured that the mother was marrying a rich duke solely for the sake of her children. That is why her mother, so obsessed with the idea of making her daughter and son aristocrats, was completely impossible to convince. In the end, the heroine, knowing her future, still found one and only way, because the man who was supposed to become her stepfather probably has a son. She had to take a risky step to save her family, but now this was the most important thing for the heroine. There was a man in her room who thoughtfully presented the lady with a snow-white slipper with exquisite pearls. She was forced to enter into a sham marriage with a man who was supposed to be her half-brother. She mentally asked her mother for forgiveness, but the heroine had no other choice. She wanted to survive, and decided that if she married the duke's son, her future half-brother, first, she would be able to prevent her mother's wedding. There is no point in asking whether the lady wanted to live with this man, because the answer was obvious, and she had to do it for the sake of her future. The banquet hall, in honor of Madame Margaret Beaufort's birthday, was luxuriously decorated for the feminine event. The banquet promised to be not only exquisite, but also incredibly intriguing. The aristocrats froze, watching the appearance of a new group of guests. The Wedgwood family, shrouded in a veil of mysterious rumors and scandalous incidents, appeared in the doorway, eclipsing the light of the crystal chandeliers. All the ladies started talking about this woman, who is called a manhunter, and it is not without reason that such fame has spread about her. Her appearance interrupted the flow of small talk, the whispers died down, glances turned towards her. Lady Helena slowly scanned the room with her penetrating gaze, lingering on each face, as if trying to read their thoughts. Rumor had it that her previous husband had died not long ago, and she was already engaged to the Duke of Orleans himself, and this was already her 5th marriage. Rumor had it that she was a commoner who was vulgarly trying to raise her status through marriage, and everyone was wondering how long this would last. And the reason why the heroine came here with her mother, knowing that absolutely everyone in the banquet hall would be talking about them, is because her mother was engaged to the Duke of Orleans himself. Helena Wedgwood, a famous lady of the empire, a woman who was born a commoner, achieved the status of viscountess after several marriages. In high society, she was shamelessly condemned, but she did not pay any attention to the dirty rumors, firmly determined to introduce her daughter and son into high society. Because for her, the existence of her daughter and son was more important than rumors that could tarnish the family's honor. However, the mother's choice was not always the right one, and with each new husband her heart was broken, and the flaws in her character became more and more numerous. The 4th husband, a viscount, while fleeing from creditors for gambling debts, suddenly fell from a cliff and died tragically. The only thing he left behind after his death was a small plot of land on the coast, and his mother once called it a useless piece of land. The damned viscount mortgaged a piece of land everywhere, only debts remained from him. This continued from day to day until a month ago, when mother took her daughter by the hand and said, she asked her daughter Immerlin to remember that in this world, for people like them, there is only one way to survive to subjugate a rich man. In a small kingdom called Denik, there were rumors about the richest and most influential family on the continent of Hellenia. The talk was about the Duchy of Orleans, and the most famous man was Waldeck of Orleans, the head of that house. Soon the mother managed to obtain a marriage proposal from the Duke of Waldeck, and this is exactly what she wanted to tell her daughter. This was followed by a wave of contempt that swept through the aristocrats, but compared to her man-hunting mother, her daughter was quite ordinary. Everyone laughed. The village girl had succeeded thanks to her mother, and this concerned not only her, but also her children, although she seemed not to understand it at all. As soon as Immerlin appeared at the banquet, the ladies of the aristocracy, who were very eager for her appearance, stared in her direction. The girl's bright, fiery red hair seemed to give them no peace, and one blonde and her friends immediately approached the well-known lady. The lady was the daughter of the Marquis of Cavendish, named Vivian. She stated that they went to classes together, or perhaps the girl does not remember anything about it at all. Immerlin certainly couldn't forget the daughter of the richest man in the South, the Marquis of Cavendish. When they were still very young, this girl despised her, the adopted daughter of a viscount who was sure that a commoner should be ashamed that her family had once latched onto a new daddy. The aristocrats argued among themselves whether this marriage would last even a year, and the heroine could endure any disdain from the aristocrats, including the fact that they called her a country bumpkin from the South. There was one thing Immerlin could never tolerate, not now, and that was when someone brazenly dared to touch and insult her family. The heroine looked at the impudent Vivian and confidently declared, now she remembered her beautiful, sweet face. The lady smiled and declared that Vivian was the same coward who was shaking with fear because little Immerlin once poured cold water on her. An indignant Vivian screamed at this girl, saying that she was allowing herself to do this. After all, she had just insulted her in front of all her friends. The novel's main character, Immerlin, was incredibly tired of all this, and now she needed to help her mother prepare for the wedding. The engagement with the Duke was to take place very soon, and Mother was sure that now the family would finally become loved and happy. Mother managed to move all her children into the Duke's luxurious mansion, where from now on everyone had to live. In fact, Immerlin was not fed up with poverty at all, but with the fact that she had become accustomed to the insults directed at her family, which she had heard all her life. She walked angrily through the corridors of the luxurious palace, and in such a large place it seemed as if there was not a single corner for her where she could rest peacefully. And in fact, the girl had long been tired of such a gloomy life, and she decided that she definitely needed to change something. While she was trying to hide from the aristocrats' ridiculous ridicule, the lady went to a secluded place, but unfortunately, she was not alone there. The dark silhouette of a man appeared before her eyes, and the girl realized in horror that she would not be able to be alone this evening. The stately Duke Eric of Orleans was a famous man. His name, as if minted on a gold coin, was known to everyone, from a peasant living in a remote province to a high-ranking imperial dignitary. Helena's husband was the famous Duke of Orleans, but fame and power attracted not only admirers, but also envious people. He had a son and the only heir of the family, and he was the very man who was supposed to become Immerlin's half-brother. She had heard that he didn't like the idea of becoming related to their family, and she was very surprised when she saw him on the palace balcony. Eric was indignant. The girl was sticking her nose everywhere, knowing that it could be impolite. The Duke warned her that it seemed she hadn't been taught any good manners in the South, since she would always stick her nose into things that weren't her business, and right now he was the one the heroine least wanted to meet. Despite the young man's rudeness, Immerlin knew perfectly well that she needed to be patient a little. She couldn't make a scene before the wedding, which would be in just a week. Besides, she understood why he was unhappy with this situation. Not only was the Duke caught up in the gossip, but he would also have to accept as a stepmother a woman who everyone called a manhunter. Looking at the girl, Eric slowly boiled with anger, and he was sure that in this regard, her brother was at least better, because at least he wasn't pretending. Immerlin felt that the young man was incredibly angry, and anything could be expected from him, and she was afraid that he could just take her and hit her. Fear appeared on the heroine's face, and Eric was perplexed that she didn't even listen when people spoke to her. The lady admitted that Eric had such a scary face that she even thought he might hit her, but he didn't seem like that kind of person. Eric sighed and was surprised that the lady had mistaken him for a real villain, which he was not at all. Eric assumed they had nothing more to talk about, and further conversation would only ruin his mood. Immerlin apologized for the misunderstanding, calling it a simple habit, and in fact, she did not want to meet him that evening at all. Eric stated that the next time someone tried to really hit Immerlin, she needed to fight with all her might or just run away. At least she wouldn't regret what happened later, and every word he said pierced the girl's thoughts like a sharp knife. The heroine even caught herself thinking that perhaps everything was perfectly fine, but her body reacted before she had time to think about it. Because of the memory of her father killing her as a child, she still cringed whenever someone approached her in a threatening manner. Quite a few years had passed. Immerlin was a grown girl, but she still couldn't escape from that terrible nightmare. She was very upset that this man saw her from such a pathetic side, which she carefully hid deep in her heart. Looking up at the sky, Immerlin thought about her mother, and there was only one question in her head: could they ever be truly happy? Finding himself completely alone on the balcony at night, Immerlin certainly didn't expect to hear someone's voice next to him, who admitted that the girl looked rather depressed. Someone had clearly approached the young lady. This person wanted to know if something was bothering the girl, but Immerlin could not understand who this person was. It was a stranger in a black robe, holding a tray with an unknown drink, a special cider made from a magic apple. He assured that if the lady drank this cider, she would be able to find a clue in her dreams to solve all her problems. Finding a clue to solve all the problems would be truly wonderful, although her mother forbade her to drink at the event, but for some reason the lady's hand itself reached for the glass. Her family's appearance in the company of aristocrats today was quite memorable, and Immerlin felt only one thing: that she definitely won't be able to take it anymore unless she drinks some wonderful cider right now to finally relax and forget about all her problems. The stranger said that sleep has 3 functions: first, a return to the past; second, the fulfillment of secret desires; and last, which meant an omen of the future. After this, Immerlin really did have a long dream. Nothing special happened there, and she still drank tea with the Duke, who was hostile to her. Ordinary incidents happened, like a girl accidentally spilling tea on herself and getting burned, and in the dream, the mother still married the Duke, and she had a stepfather and a half-brother. However, almost at the very end of the dream, a terrible event occurred. Immerlin saw her brother Philip dead, but besides this, her mother was also dead. Next to the lifeless bodies of her relatives stood a man in a strict black suit, holding a bloody weapon in his hands. Immerlin felt fear in every cell of her body, and at one moment she suddenly woke up because it was no longer possible to bear it. To her great surprise, she woke up in her room, but she clearly remembered that she had been on the balcony the previous evening, but she had no memory of what happened next. Immerlin clearly felt like she had seen something terrible, and by the way, they say that man at the end with the gun, it seems he definitely looked like the Duke of Orleans. Remembering the smallest details of the terrible dream, Immerlin still could not believe that it really was just a dream. Her mother came into her room and asked her daughter if she had accidentally gotten drunk and nothing would happen, because the lady did not remember anything at all. Immerlin said that yesterday she was drunk and does not remember at all how she returned back, although it would have been better for the lady not to drink, but to look for a decent guy. The lady asked her mother to answer the questions honestly, asking whether she really loved the Duke of Orleans. Helena just smiled, and of course she loved him, but only for one reason: he had an incredible amount of money. Still, Immerlin was quite uncomfortable with this man, and she tried to ask her mother if she was sure that the Duke was a good man. Having expressed her concern, Immerlin suggested that she had probably become overly sensitive after that incident with the Viscount. Perhaps it was because of the strange dream she had this morning, and Immerlin clearly felt very uneasy. Suddenly, the maid announced that Monsieur Eric of Orléans had arrived, and the lady completely forgot that he was supposed to come today about the wedding gifts. Immerlin didn't expect His Highness the arrogant Eric to come in person, but her mother, citing a hangover, asked her daughter to go out in her place. The lady claimed she might accidentally vomit into her teacup and had an incredibly severe headache. There was nothing to be done, and Immerlin needed to meet with Eric. She asked the maid to tell her that she would be ready in literally 10 minutes. A young gentleman in a formal black suit calmly waited for the young lady Immerlin in the living room. The young man waited for her for 10 minutes and was surprised that Lady Immerlin had only just deigned to appear. The lady came out and immediately asked the young duke's forgiveness, confessing that she had overslept a little, which is why they had to wait so long for her to come out. Eric asked to forget this situation and came here for only one reason: they needed to discuss wedding gifts. For some reason, this scene seemed familiar to the heroine, as if they had already had a conversation before, and what a strong feeling of déjà vu she experienced at that moment. Immerlin remembered this situation, and then the same thing had already happened while they were talking like this, and the maid didn't suspect anything. The heroine remembered this tray of hot tea very well, and she knew perfectly well what would happen next. The next second, the maid will suddenly trip and will be completely unaware of how the tray will fly apart in all directions. The heroine's heart sank. Time seemed to stop, and images of what had happened in the past flashed through her head. The teapot, as if alive, soared into the air in slow motion, and with it all hope for a calm day. She tripped over the edge of the carpet, which seemed to have been placed there by the devil himself to test her patience, and the hot tea, like fiery lava, rushed straight at the Duke. The teapot tumbled and fell at the Duke's feet, shattering into tiny pieces, and boiling water splashed onto the heroine's hand, which she had held out. The boiling water burned her hand, leaving a bright pink mark on her delicate skin. Imerlin shuddered, but didn't utter a sound. Remembering this, the heroine realized that this was the same situation when the Duke was shouting at the maid to quickly bring medicine to treat the burn. Imerlin immediately realized that this was the situation she had seen in her wall after trying the stranger's cider. She remembered his words that sleep had 3 functions. The first was to return to the past, the second was to fulfill a wish, and the last was a foreshadowing of the future. And could the old woman's words about never ignoring the omen given by a dream really be true? At that moment she realized with horror that if she left everything as it was, the dreams would indeed turn out to be a prophecy. What would happen next would be a terrible situation, which she had definitely seen in her dreams, and both her mother and Philip would be dead. In her dream, Imerlin saw her entire family suddenly die at the hands of the hated Duke, and this dream was more than reality. She certainly didn't expect that everything could repeat itself in such minute details, because all this time she was sure that these were just dreams. For a long time, the heroine Imerlin had one big goal, namely to open a small soup shop, which the family would open on their own, without the help of their stepfathers, and whose mother would prepare excellent chicken soup. The sociable brother would attract clients, and Imerlin was going to take over the accounting and management, but her hopes were completely dashed after she remembered yesterday's dream, and in fact, the Duke had married her mother because of the land that the Viscount left her. The damned Viscount mortgaged this land everywhere. All that was left of him was debt, and the daughter did not understand why the Duke married her mother for this reason. The mother did not have time to explain. She asked her daughter to promise one thing, that the Duke of Orleans had set his sights on this land, and this must remain a strict secret. The daughter could not understand at all what was going on, but she asked her mother to calm down, and she did not look like a person who would chat about this left and right. She even tried to persuade her mother to run away before it was too late, and her mother also didn't like the man who made her tremble with fear, and her daughter wanted to live just an ordinary, happy life. Despite all her persuasion, her mother remained adamant and promised that after this they would become happy. She considered the Duke a man who would even give up her corpse as collateral for this land in order to obtain it, and soon Imerlin understood why her mother was so worried. A few days after the wedding, the girl had a dream, and in one of the dark rooms of the night palace, a female voice was heard. For some reason, the mother ran into her daughter's room at night, trying to wake her up, but it was all too strange that this could happen at such a late hour. Helen gave her daughter the important documents and asked her to leave through the back door and run to the nearest police station. She asked not to open the envelope until she got to the station, and when she arrived, to say the name of Prosecutor Patrick. Imerlin didn't understand what could have happened unexpectedly, but her mother said that she had to go. The eternal servants were probably already looking for her. She only asked her daughter to be sure to listen and do everything exactly as she said. Until that moment, Imerlin thought that her mother, having listened to her, had decided to escape, so she gathered her things and waited for her at the mansion. The heroine decided to wait for them downstairs, and was sure that Mother and Philip would soon come out, and she had mysterious documents in her hands that were very necessary. While the lady was standing below, she suddenly heard 2 loud shots that seemed to have thundered right then and there in the vicinity of the mansion. When Imerlin managed to reach the place from where the terrible shots were coming, she saw a terrible picture in front of her. Opening the door of one of the rooms, her beloved only family was already dead. In the room, she saw a man in a black formal suit who had been waiting for her to appear all this time and was sure that Imerlin would definitely come. The man grinned and said that it was very brave of her not to run away, but to return back to where the terrible shots were coming from. The man admitted that for a family of swindlers, they were surprisingly close-knit, wiping the bloody gun and drops of blood from his face. It was the Duke, Mother's fiancé. He pointed the barrel of a gun straight at the girl's face and asked her to immediately hand over the important documents. the heroine clearly remembered that in her dream, the Duke of Orleans killed her family, and perhaps it was not just a dream, but a prophetic dream, which means that everything will happen in the near future. And all this time the heroine was thinking about what to do next, while Duke Eric applied a cold bag of ice to the girl's burn. The heroine screamed from the intense pain of the burn, and she had no idea how painful it could be. Eric had a small bag in his hands, and he assured her that if the wound wasn't properly treated now, she would suffer from it for a long time. Lost in memories of her past dream, the girl forgot that the young Duke was still nearby, and up until that moment they had been discussing wedding gifts. Perhaps the Duke would not be involved in this, and he would also not be very happy with this marriage, but now Eric behaved like a noble man. Yesterday on the terrace too, although Eric turned out to be arrogant, he apologized every time without much hesitation, fully admitting his guilt. Immerlin couldn't understand if he was the same as his father, but for some reason this young man seemed different to her. The lady stated that she did not need an apology in words alone, and preferred to judge a person by his actions. The heroine said that she was ready to accept an apology only in money, although it was a little risky, but she decided to try to provoke the Duke. To her surprise, he agreed, and since that was the girl's will, he was ready to pay compensation, ask what amount would suit her. The young man was innocent of any wrongdoing, and like any person, he would surely have to show his true colors in this situation. So Immerlin asked for 100,000 gold pieces to be paid, as she was sure the young man would definitely be angry at these words. It was the amount that the average aristocratic family spent in about a month, and she couldn't believe that the Duke had agreed so easily. Last night he had despised the girl, he had just applied the ice pack himself, and Merlin could not understand what this man was thinking. By the way, judging by what she heard yesterday at the banquet, Erica doesn't seem to be complaining much about her father, the Duke. The words she overheard yesterday at the banquet while wandering around the mansion were the talk of the representatives of the ducal family's collateral branch, and they say that Eric felt threatened and started his own business without even telling his father anything about it. In the opinion of these people, business and the young Duke had nothing to do with each other, but the heroine was sure that she had definitely heard this strange conversation. Suddenly her mother entered the room and apologized to the young master, stating that she had not been feeling well all morning. For some reason, as soon as she left, the young Duke stood up from his seat and admitted that it was time for him to leave. He handed over the list of wedding gifts to Lady Immerlin and confessed to the lady that he had some extremely important business to attend to. Mother asked him to wait, offering him some hot tea, but he only warned that he would send his servant for the wedding dress. The Duke left the room, and his mother, looking at his departing silhouette, called young Eric an ill-mannered gentleman. She felt sorry for him, because his own mother was crazy, so the lady just wanted to be kind to Eric. According to rumors circulating in society, the Duke's mother was an unhappy woman who suddenly went mad and committed suicide. The truth written in the documents from the girl's dream was completely different, and there was something interesting. In fact, the Duke killed her and then made the accident look like suicide. Therefore, Immerlin was sure that if her mother married such a man, then the future from her terrible dream would indeed soon become reality. She still wanted to prove to her mother that the Duke was not the man with whom she was destined to build her destiny. Immerlin wondered if perhaps her mother would change her mind about this wedding, and whether she hadn't noticed her anxiety yet. Helena sat down next to her daughter and asked why she looked so nervous and upset today. Compared to how it was before, their family now lived like people, so the mother was sure that her daughter should not worry so much. She gently touched her daughter's hand and confessed that with the Duke they would be able to forget all the terrible memories of the past and finally start with a clean slate. Immerlin looked into her mother's eyes and asked what would happen if, because of the Duke of Orleans, her mother became even more unhappy than she was before. It didn't matter to her now that her mother would be a little unhappy, because her daughter and her brother would definitely be happy. She asked Immerlin to stop talking about it and to go try on her wedding dress, and the heroine did not understand how she could convince her mother, because she could not tell her about her terrible dream. To annul the ill-fated wedding, more compelling evidence is needed, for example, those very documents that record the atrocities of the Duke of Orleans. The ladies headed to the capital's most famous boutique to pick out luxurious outfits for the upcoming event. Immerlin tried on the first dress. It had an incredibly tight corset, but her mother assured her that she would have to be patient for the sake of a perfect fit. Helena asked her daughter to go with her to look at the wedding dresses, but because of the corset, Imerlin felt like she would die before her time. She stood in front of a huge mirror and saw such a luxurious dress on herself for the first time. And by the way, the dress was so magnificent, it was as if the heroine herself was getting married. The dress was expensive, and Imerlin wondered if it would be better if they gave her money, since with the savings she had now, she could not make any plans. While she was staring at her reflection in the mirror, the heroine didn't even notice that she had said it out loud. A girl, a servant from the ducal house of Orleans, approached her and asked if there was something that displeased the lady. Eric had said he would send a servant, but Imerlin had no idea he would fulfill this request so quickly. She admitted that she definitely liked the luxurious dress, and Lilia was incredibly happy. Imerlin had no time for dresses. Now she had no idea how to interfere with her mother's wedding and what to do. Now she didn't have enough time to find evidence and convince her mother to break off the wedding, and perhaps she herself would have to create some kind of scandal. But the scandal didn't seem to be long in coming, and a lady appeared in the boutique who was just wondering what to do with Imerlin after her latest outburst. The lady was present at Madame Beaufort's birthday party. They had already met at the banquet, but that meeting did not end well. She first met her when her mother had just married a viscount. Her mother tried to make a real aristocrat out of her daughter, so she sent her to a school for noble maidens in the south. Vivian, the daughter of the richest man in the south, the Marquis of Cavendish, didn't seem very pleased with her. She immediately realized that this girl was a commoner. It was she who mocked the heroine because of her common origin, and every time tried to create a scandal. An awkward situation arose between them when Imerlin was no longer prepared to tolerate the insults and threats directed at her. One day, the girl grabbed a mug of hot tea at that moment. She was in the midst of her rebellious teenage years and had absolutely no idea how to hold herself together. And she had to face her sworn enemy again after the damned party, who had heard perfectly well the rumors that were now circulating in high society. Vivian asked how the lady was going to take revenge for the damage. Did she really think that it was just like that? She was incredibly angry that the girl had spilled wine on her dress and run away yesterday, but for Imerlin it was a normal little thing, and then, as now, nothing had changed. The lady replied that she was ready to compensate for all the damage and promised to send the money later, and asked Vivian not to bother her and to go her own way. Hearing this, the girl became angry because the heroine had just clearly made it clear to her that something was bothering her. Imerlin replied that she was not at all happy to see her and asked Vivian not to meet her again while the aristocrat was outraged by her behavior. She was sure that Imerlin couldn't look at herself from the outside and always pretended to be cool, as if she didn't care. The villainess warned that as soon as everyone found out how insignificant her family was, she would be immediately kicked out of the Duke's house. For some reason, the heroine never thought about this, and if she can't convince her mother, then she needs to create a situation after which the engagement will have to be broken off. A situation from which even the Duke himself could not get out, and she decided to turn to her personal servants. After talking with Vivian, she came up with a pretty good plan on how she could break up her mother's wedding. Without giving her time to recover, Imerlin grabbed the lady by her perfectly styled hair, and a squeal of surprise and indignation filled the air. Imerlin, contrary to expectations, was not going to tolerate her antics. Fatigue and accumulated irritation from constant humiliation were boiling inside her. The strands of hair remained in her hands. The heroine's grip was strong, despite the fact that Vivian tried to break free. She didn't care at all what she was doing right before her mother's wedding, and something happened on the morning about 5 days before the wedding. Brother Philip addressed his sister, because recently people began calling her a southern rat. Information reached her that after recent events her mother had taken ill, and she was sure that it would be better to lie in bed for a while than to die before the wedding. Judging by the scandal Philip, who after his mother wanted this wedding more than anyone else, created, the heroine realized that this plan would definitely work. Now the aristocrats will be chattering left and right on every corner that the children are another disgrace to the Orleans family, but this is all the lady expected, for the aristocrats to chatter even more. Besides, the maid that Eric sent saw her dragging Madame Vivian by the hair, and the Duke of Orleans will definitely hear about it too. The plan was simply perfect, and there was probably already a real commotion in the Orleans family due to the fact that they turned out to be a scandalous family. The brother asked his sister to admit that Vivian had definitely provoked her first, since she had always been the first to attack before. Imerlin told her brother that she simply pulled out her hair because it was incredibly luxurious. This time she definitely couldn't hold back. The brother promised to answer the Duke's questions properly and settle the rest himself, and the lady wondered what she could say to make the Duke hate her even more. Early in the morning they went to the luxurious palace, and their arrival was already expected. The ducal family was ready to meet with Imerlin and Lord Philip. He certainly didn't ask for this meeting for no reason. The lady was met by the venerable Duke, who suggested that if they had arrived here so early in the morning, they were probably very worried. Next to his father stood Mr. Eric, whom the lady had already managed to meet once. The first time she saw him after that meeting at their home, when he was next to Herzen, she did not understand at all what this man was thinking about. By the way, regarding the Duke, Imerlin was sure that he would definitely be furious, but she saw a good-natured smile on his face, and she did not expect this at all. The man smiled and asked the lady not to worry about anything, as they had already had a fairly good conversation with the Marquis, and he suggested they discuss the rest inside. Breaking up the ill-fated wedding turned out to be much more difficult than the heroine had imagined. The brother and sister were in the main building for the second time, and the good-natured Duke promised the butler to give the heroes a tour. Philip thanked the gentleman, tears welling up in his eyes from the fact that the man already considered them a full-fledged family. Besides, Eric had been looking at Imerlin closely from the very beginning, and he was probably acting this way because of yesterday's threats. The lady carefully assessed the situation and her interaction with the Duke, and at one point it seemed to her as if nothing was happening. She was not surprised when the gentleman decided to ask about the reason for yesterday's quarrel with Lady Vivian, which he already knew about. Philip decided to stand up for his sister and turned to the Duke, promising to explain everything in detail. The Duke stated that he was not addressing Philip at all, but asked Imerlin the question directly, wanting to receive a truthful answer. The man was definitely pretending to be kind and gentle, but as soon as he felt his authority was threatened, his gaze immediately changed. This was his true face, and the gentleman declared that the girl would have to officially apologize to Lady Vivian for the unpleasant incident. He promised to arrange a suitable meeting tomorrow, but suddenly heard that Imerlin was going to refuse the apology. The lady stated that she was not ready to comply with the demand and did not understand why she should apologize, since she had deliberately arranged this to create this situation. She said there was no reason for the recent quarrel, she just hadn't liked this girl for a long time. The Duke probably didn't expect to hear such an answer, because he was sure that Imerlin should apologize to smooth over the previous quarrel. The girl hoped that the Duke would finally understand how reckless she really was, and would simply refuse to marry her mother before it was too late. She saw right through this man and knew what he could do in the future, because in her opinion, he was beating like a real psychopath. His son Eric decided to intervene in the conversation and asked his father to stop for a bit and not jump to conclusions. The brother had no intention of leaving this situation just like that and was ready to kneel and apologize to the Duke at any moment. Philip stated that, in fact, his sister had been suffering for a long time from the mental harassment that Lady Vivian had once inflicted on her. He even had some evidence. The young man showed a note where Vivian wrote how disgusted she was to be around a commoner like her. These were the very words that she had spoken to her in the past, only now before her eyes was a fake note, written in an imitation handwriting. Philip continued to tell how the girl bullied his sister, and their family suffered a lot, so they moved here from the south, but everything repeats itself. Imerlin understood that Philip was talking complete nonsense because they were kicked out because he was having an affair with the Viscount's daughter and her friend. It was definitely some hidden plan of Philip's, and he had a reason to bring a fake note to discredit Vivian's honor. The Duke actually didn't know about this, and in that case he promised to contact the Marquis and help the family get an official apology. Imerlin understood that the deception about the fake note could be revealed, and she stated with fear that everything was in order, and there was definitely no need to do this. If it was revealed that they had lied, the already shaky trust in their family would collapse, and the Viscount could quickly check out that land on the coast. Philip's performance was truly superb, and tears even appeared in his eyes as his sister cursed her brother as best she could. After Philip's crazy act, fortunately this incident was settled, the Duke suggested that everyone go hunting together to pass the time. Imerlin decided to rest better in the mansion and thanked the Duke for his concern, and Eric also decided to stay to urgently answer an important letter. The Duke invited him to inspect the mansion together and have a good rest after all the recent events. The butler showed with particular pride a great sculpture that had been passed down in the Orleans family and was carved from expensive marble. But Immerlin was little interested in this. She was trying to understand whether this meant that her grand plan had failed miserably. And even if such a scandal did not work to ruin the upcoming wedding, the heroine could not understand at all what to do now. She remembered the strange documents in her dream, and by the way, she wondered where her mother got them from. Since these are very important documents that are difficult to access, there is a high probability that they are kept in the Duke's personal space, such as his office. And since the Duke is ready to kill the entire family because of some documents, perhaps if the heroine finds these documents and threatens him, she will be able to break off the engagement. She turned to the butler and asked for some hot tea, admitting that her throat was too dry. When the tea was ready, she asked the butler to call her, while she decided to admire the local works of art a little longer. The lady confessed that she was very charmed by the dignity of the duchy, and the butler went off with special respect to get tea. Only she knew the truth, and there was no talk of any dignity, because for her it was just a house where a cruel killer lived. It was in the Duke's office that she was in her terrible dream. It was there that she found the corpses of her family. It was there that she was brutally murdered. The heroine needed to find a place where secret documents could be hidden, and this time she had nothing to fear. She managed to get into the Duke's office, and since she had very little time, Immerlin tried to figure out where the documents could be hidden. She examined the most hidden places, looked into the fireplace, looked under all the paintings, but unfortunately found nothing. And the natural placement of the bookcase most likely indicated the presence of a secret space, and the people who were once her father's also had such hidden places in their offices. The lady grabbed one of the doors, which probably led somewhere, but even with all her efforts, the door for some reason did not open further. Suddenly she heard strange voices in the corridor, and Lady Immerlin was probably being looked for by someone, because she disappeared too suddenly. She decided to just pretend to be lost and go outside before she was found in the Duke's office. She failed to fulfill her plan at that moment. The Duke's son, Eric, appeared next to her and was expecting to see her here. From the young man's menacing face, she realized that she would definitely be faced with unnecessary questions about the reasons why she ended up here. The Duke extended his hand to her and asked Lady Immerlin to come to him immediately, and at that moment the girl began to tremble. The Duke's son was behind the door, but the lady did not expect to see him here because she was sure that no one should be here. The butler scolded the maid for not keeping an eye on Lady Immerlin and for leaving the door to the Duke's office open. He ordered the maids to find the mistress as quickly as possible and promised that a serious conversation would take place a little later. Eric slammed the secret door behind him, listened carefully until all the servants of the mansion left, and finally they were alone. They stood together behind the mysterious door, and Eric only asked why Immerlin had decided to come to the Duke's office in the first place. She understood that her plan could be exposed, and with a trembling voice the girl was completely unable to answer out of fear. The lady only asked Eric for forgiveness, trembling all over, and now she definitely couldn't collect her thoughts. Seeing the girl's agitated state, Eric was worried that something had happened to her or that she was in pain. Immerlin only asked to be let out of here, and it seemed that the longer she was in this dark room, the more afraid she began to become. As a child, her biological father hated his daughter far more than any stepfather, and at that moment, the girl was overcome with terrible memories. Her father always locked her in a dark room to make her realize her guilt, leaving her alone there each time while he dealt with the merchant guild. He often called her a stupid girl who, once she grew up, would definitely not be capable of anything. In fact, none of the situations were her fault, and each time she pounded her fists on the door so that her father would finally let her out. Her mother and brother did not know that her biological father often abused the girl, and every day she continued to live in terrible torment so that her father would finally let her out of the dark room. Therefore, having learned about this, Mother took her and Philip, they ran away from there, and she learned much later that Mother and brother were also victims. She was determined to do everything to protect them, and her mother vowed to always be there after this situation. Finding herself in a confined space again, the heroine remembered her terrible past and realized how tired she was of it all. And she certainly didn't expect to be caught in this state today by Eric, the Duke's son himself, who found her in his father's office. Eric extended his hand to the girl because it was the first time he had seen her so scared. That same strange expression appeared on her face again, as if Eric was the last villain and the most evil man in the Empire. Indeed, her face reflected a mixture of anger, hatred, and disappointment, as well as fear of the unknown future. Her sympathetic expression as a child was so hated by her father that Immerlin never showed fear again. She declared that she could get up on her own and did not need the Duke's help. She felt ashamed, and for some reason she constantly came across this man in this form. Judging by her scream, Eric understood that there was no need to worry, and decided to ask the girl again the question that did not bother him. "Immerlin," she said. She was just looking around the mansion and forgot herself, which is why she ended up in the Duke's office. Eric wasn't going to believe it and asked the girl to come up with a better excuse, but he, too, was in his father's office at that moment. So Immerlin decided to approach him and find out why he was behind the hidden doors, and it was definitely not without reason. After all, even if Eric is a young duke, he still can't just enter the office of the venerable duke, sneak into the secret room of the office, sending away the servants. Besides, the girl was sure that if she connected this matter with Madame Margaret, she would seem to be in a difficult situation. For the first time, she felt like she had finally won the verbal altercation, because Eric genuinely didn't know what to say. The lady asked if it would be better if they, the suspicious characters, simply pretended not to know each other. To be honest, the heroine was interested in why Eric was hiding here. The young man realized that there was no way he could find out what this girl was up to. She immediately asked the statement to say that she had no selfish intentions, but suddenly Eric asked why the lady tried to deceive her father with a note, forging Lady Cavendish's handwriting. Lily reported to the Duke not only about the note, but also about what happened in the boutique, and how Immerlin tore out all of the lady's hair. Despite being persuaded not to tell, she still told the gentleman, and Lilia now did not understand why the Duke did not tell her about the note at the meeting with her father. It all started with the fact that Vivian really insulted Immerlin, and Eric was sure that whoever insults others should receive the punishment they deserve, because hurting others is bad. The young Duke now looked incredibly naive, but in him one could read that very prudence that a venerable gentleman deserves. At his age, it was really strange to say such naive things. Now the heroine understood a lot of things. She was not afraid to say that the Duke was a naive young man. She definitely noticed this, because Eric Orleans really does not know anything about his own father. She didn't want to get involved in this story, but since it had already happened, she decided to say it straight out this time. If Eric didn't know anything, then he should just keep quiet, because ignorance is also a sin. The Duke certainly didn't expect to hear that he was ignorant, and that the girl considered him to be just a naive young duke. Suddenly, the heroes heard a loud sound that was exactly like a gunshot, and Immerlin was incredibly scared. It is suspicious that the Duke suddenly suggested that his brother Philip go hunting, since something bad could very well happen on the hunting grounds. The girl was afraid for her brother's life and decided that she must immediately go to Philip. She walked over and opened the window on the second floor, and its height was approximately equal to the height of the third floor. Immerlin certainly wasn't going to calm down now, even despite Eric's words that she should climb down from the window, and under no circumstances should she even think of jumping down. She asked Eric for forgiveness, but now she couldn't do otherwise, and she certainly couldn't calm down, knowing that her family could be in danger right now. Therefore, the girl, without hesitation, jumped into the open window to help her brother as quickly as possible. Eric was completely perplexed, because the fragile girl had just jumped straight down from the second floor. She seemed not to hear his words, while the young gentleman was perfectly aware that this girl was too strange. Lady Immerlin, the gentleman had absolutely no idea what she could have been thinking at that very moment when she decided to jump from the second floor. The maid approached the gentleman and asked if he had managed to find something important that he had been looking for a long time. Holding a strange envelope in his hands, the young man admitted that fortunately it was exactly where he expected it to be. Now that he had found the necessary documents and needed to make an appointment, he asked the maid to send a letter to that very person. And so, with firm determination, the heroine came to the hunting grounds on the territory of the Duke of Orleans, and contrary to expectations, it turned out that there were no problems here, and peace reigned. Of course, for the girl this was far from the image of an ideal world, and it seems that the heroine herself is not yet accustomed to this. The sight of dead animals simply made her sick, and she had no idea that hunting grounds were such a cruel place. Having found her brother, Imerlin finally calmed down, and the Duke good-naturedly told her about the wonderful hunt and suggested returning to the mansion. Even if hunting was fun, she couldn't understand how anyone could enjoy it so much, and how the Duke didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt when killing living creatures. And when she looked at the dead bird, she heard in his words a warning that their family would be next. There were only 6 days left before the wedding. The chances of reaching an agreement with Eric were becoming increasingly unclear, and Imerlin's documents still had not been stolen. Having arranged to resolve a huge scandal that even the Duke could not cope with, the girls also failed. But despite her determination, time passed inexorably. 3 days later, Imerlin finally realized that she had not yet figured out how to stop the ill-fated wedding, and her mother had been busy preparing for the wedding all this time. The heroine also failed to come up with a plan for a scandal that even the Duke could not cope with, and at least just in case, she secretly searched his house, but never found the documents. And she also could not demand the dissolution of the engagement without any reason, as long as she looked at her happy mother. Only she looked incredibly serious in this situation, while her brother and mother were busy designing the wedding dress. Imerlin warned her brother that he would definitely not be able to exchange the precious stones from the dress for money, even if the engagement was broken tomorrow. The daughter's speech was rather pessimistic. The mother asked her not to speak like that anymore. The lady noticed that her daughter had been acting very strange lately. Did she really think that the Duke would dare to take her mother away from her? Hugging her daughter, she promised that Tanya should not worry, because her mother would not go anywhere even after the wedding and would continue to stay by her side. Helena had always dreamed of her daughter and son living happily, but for some reason her daughter continued to be very wary of the Duke. Imerlin understood perfectly well that this was not the issue at all, and her relatives simply did not know the truth that could soon happen. What the mother didn't like most was that her son continued to go to that strange bar called the Night Rose. She was deathly afraid that terrible rumors would spread about him in society. She even forbade her son to appear there again, saying that the princess was supposed to come today, but the princess and the young Duke Eric were very well acquainted. The Night Rose is a heavily guarded tavern in a bustling area of the capital, a place where aristocrats can chat and make secret acquaintances. For Philip, who was trying to connect with the aristocracy, this place was certainly of interest. She considered her brother a pathetic womanizer, and perhaps he would still manage to ruin many more girls' lives. As soon as she heard that a princess was supposed to appear in this Verna today, she realized that this was definitely her chance. In the bustling area of the kingdom's capital, music played every night, and the streets were filled with a pleasant warm light. Still, the heroine decided to go there when she was in the south of the capital by 8 in the evening. All the streets were already empty. In the capital, everything was completely different. People walked around late every night as if it were daytime, and life here was in full swing. Every evening, luxurious aristocrats strolled along the street. The heroine could not understand why these people were still awake. She had finally managed to find that very sign with the image of a rose, and right now she was going to go to the mysterious tavern. Imerlin had heard for a long time that every evening there was a guard posted at this building who thoroughly checked the guests. Ordinary people were not allowed in there, and the guard asked the girl why she had decided to appear there. The girl managed to figure out what words she should say to the guard to let her in, and she quietly said, "A rose that blooms at night is always silent during the day." After this phrase, the security guards immediately let her into the establishment and wished the heroine a wonderful time. If she hadn't known the password, she definitely wouldn't have been able to get out here, and it's good that she managed to find out this information from her brother before she decided to come here. The girl knew that the magnificent Princess Ella, whom she was going to meet, would come tonight. Princess Ella von Denneck, first in line to the throne of the kingdom, according to Philip, was an incredibly powerful and flighty person. Therefore, she could not stand it when someone even looked at the man she had chosen, and several women had already been banished from society because of this. Philip insistently asked his sister not to catch the princess's eye, but this was her main plan. Today, she was going to become the princess's partner and create a huge scandal in order to finally prevent her mother's wedding. The heroine had specially bought new shoes suitable for this place, and her expensive, eye-catching dress was custom-made. The grandiose preparations were complete, and now all that was left for Imerlin to do was to win back the man the princess herself had chosen. Unfortunately, the establishment's employee warned the girl that she would not be able to meet with the princess, since the lady usually does not leave her room and conducts all business there. Immerlin couldn't believe that the princess really wouldn't leave the room, and that she had started all this in vain. This way her plan might fail, and then it would be better to intercept the man who is heading to the princess's room. Before that, she needed to find where that very room was. She noticed the curtains on the second floor, which looked rather suspicious. Some people were constantly coming out of there, and the heroine began to think that this was probably that very mysterious room. On the one hand, the plan was truly magnificent, but there was one flaw: the heroine had absolutely no experience in relationships. She had no idea how to attract a man, and in her head there were only strange words to offer a stranger to have fun tonight. The lady was running through all the possible dialogues in her head and was going to get to the first man who came out of this room. All that remains is to say the prepared phrase and everything can work out perfectly. She approached the first man and asked if his father was a thief, to continue this stupid phrase, but she realized her words sounded too strange. As soon as she said these words, she felt so awkward that she was ready to sink through the ground. The young man looked at her too suspiciously, but at that moment the lady felt some danger from him. He suddenly grabbed her hand and asked who she was, because she had been looking at him all this time while he was climbing the stairs. He reminded her of the most terrible villain. At that moment he looked angrily at the girl and called her too sweet. The stranger had a rather frightening look, and Immerlin asked her to let go, not to squeeze her hand so painfully. He didn't listen to her at all and dragged her somewhere, while the lady categorically refused to go. He definitely wasn't going to take her to the princess's secret room, and at that moment the girl didn't notice how her shoe fell off her foot. She suggested that the enraged man go home and wake up properly, because he smelled incredibly strongly of alcohol. She loudly asked him to let go, but at that moment her magnificent shoe was already in the hands of another man. The venerable gentleman took the beautiful slipper in his hands and loudly expressed indignation at what kind of noise was going on here. While Immerlin tried to brush off the enraged, drunk man, the young man insisted that there was a very important person here and now. Looking at the young man, she realized with horror that it was that very Duke Eric who was standing in front of her, and she certainly did not expect this. 30 minutes before the meeting between Immerlin and Eric, an important meeting took place in the princess's secret room, while she slowly sipped red wine from an expensive glass. The kingdom's first crown princess, Ella, was certain that this was the most secluded and quiet place imaginable. She sat in her room with Eric, who had no idea what the lady meant and categorically did not want to understand it. The lady insisted that it was time for him to show interest in relationships between a man and a woman, and that when he was in the Royal Knightly Order, he had a vow of chastity, but he had not been there for a long time. Eric decided to pretend he hadn't heard this disrespectful conversation, while the princess called him an incredible bore. Although it was precisely because of this point that the lady was now here and talking with the Duke, and she had her own plans for him. Eric Orleans, who once rose to the rank of captain of the Royal Knightly Order, was already renowned for his outstanding talent in fencing from the age of 14. Hearing rumors that the Duke's son was a fencing genius, the Royal Knightly Order offered him an entrance exam, and despite the fact that with his skills the exam was unnecessary, Eric still took part in it. Having officially passed the exam, Eric joined the Royal Knightly Order, and even now, having left his post as captain, he was still devoted to Ella. The princess said that was enough of the courtesy, and today she expected the Duke to bring her something she had asked for earlier. He still had to show his loyalty, and the Duke, without any worry, took out that very mysterious envelope. Despite knowing that these documents could pose a threat to the ducal house, he still brought them to the princess. The son stole documents hidden by his father, the head of the family, and the lady asked how she should take this information. Rumors circulated throughout the empire that Prince Robert, second in line to the throne, was colluding with aristocrats to start a business using royal family money. Eric assured that the Duchy of Orleans was among these aristocrats, so the princess ordered a specific investigation. He only carried out this order with special respect, and did not even open the mysterious letter without checking the contents. Eric did his duty and stole the documents, and he didn't care at all what was inside. Even if ignorance is a terrible sin, there certainly can be no greater sin than total mistrust, so Eric swore allegiance to the princess. Ella admitted that it would be incredibly nice if everyone around her was as righteous, and she just wanted to see if his father was as good. After reading the important documents, the princess realized that there were no particular problems in the Duchy of Orleans, contrary to her expectations. She asked Eric to read it too, because he too had to get acquainted with the papers that he stole from his father. Having carefully read the document, the Duke realized that there really was nothing terrible in them, and in his hands was an ordinary account book, such as is kept in a ducal house. The princess admitted that if it had been a business plan with Robert, she could have made Eric her henchman. For a long time, the lady thought about how to lure the Duke into her trap. She assured him that Eric would live more peacefully if he once belonged to her. Eric didn't need this at all. He believed that marriage should be concluded on different terms, and he also felt uncomfortable being in this terrible tavern. For the princess, this place was certainly suitable for secret conversations, but for others it would look like just a date between a man and a woman. A conscientious young man like Eric would never come to such a place, so he asked the princess to avoid such situations next time. After the conversation, the Duke was about to leave, but before that he asked his personal maid to guard the princess that night. The princess decided to ask the girl if these documents were really the ones she had requested. She was still worried that the documents might be fake and asked the girl if Eric could be trusted. The maid confirmed that the young master had taken them from his father's secret storage, which was located in the Duke's office. Therefore, the documents are definitely true, and the princess, having heard her opinion, realized that there was a possibility that the Duke was deceiving even his own son. Eric probably didn't know anything about this, but perhaps he already had a completely different plan in his head. As soon as he left the princess's room, he suddenly saw luxurious red hair that could only belong to one girl. He certainly wasn't imagining things, it was Lady Immerlin, but he couldn't believe that the girl had suddenly appeared in such a place. Eric needed to be prepared just in case, because he had no idea what other trouble this girl could cause. The meeting could not be avoided, and he managed to catch Immerlin, who was trying to fight off a drunken stranger. In fact, Eric heard strange screams and went to see what was going on, but a red-haired lady stood in front of him. She screamed loudly for the drunken young man to get away from her immediately, and she definitely needed help now. The man was outraged. The girl somehow managed to drag the weapon into the night rose, and he shouted, "She is definitely crazy." If this guy told the guards, Immerlin could be in big trouble, but now Eric stood in front of her, his hand clutching her shoe tightly. Eric swung with all his might and threw the shoe right into the face of the drunk stranger who was pestering him like a girl in front of him. He certainly didn't dare threaten a woman and drag her by force to who knows where, and he also managed to hear an unpleasant insult directed at the lady. Still, the Duke was most interested in why he had encountered the main troublemaker in such a strange establishment. This time, Immerlin really did get scared, because anyone would be scared when they saw someone being knocked out with a shoe. Eric seriously questioned the girl's reason for coming here, since security checks weapons especially carefully, but she somehow managed to bring a knife with her. And if any other aristocrat, and not the Duke, had noticed her, she would have been arrested right now by the royal knights. This situation was truly too dangerous, and Immerlin realized this only now when she saw Eric in front of her, but he was definitely worried. She certainly couldn't be mistaken, because from the young man's worried face one could tell that he was truly worried about her. Eric asked the lady to quickly put on her shoes, and still wanted to find out what she was doing here in such an establishment late at night. The Duke carefully put on the shoe and asked her why she had come here, whether she really knew the man he had just knocked out. Immerlin knew for sure that the princess would be here, and she thanked Eric for his help, but this attitude was too much for her. The lady asked if Eric was having a secret meeting with the princess, and judging by his reaction, she was definitely right. Otherwise, why would he come to such a place? But the young man tried to justify himself by saying that all this was absolutely not true. Judging by the reaction, Eric really did come to meet the princess, which means the man she needs to seduce today is the young Duke Eric. The lady had come here knowing what kind of place it was, just before her mother's wedding, and Eric wondered if she was planning to cause more trouble. And since she turned out to be so caring towards her mother, the Duke could not believe that this was some kind of game. Eric's character was truly absolutely terrible and impudent, and Immerlin was indignant at how much longer he would continue to humiliate her. While Immerlin was screaming indignantly, she didn't even notice how she accidentally tripped over the hem of her dress and almost fell right onto the floor. The Duke managed to catch her. He only managed to see her frightened eyes before she almost ended up on the floor right then and there. Immerlin looked up. Something unusual was splashing in the Duke's eyes, usually cold and distant. Whether it was surprise or respect, she couldn't tell exactly. At that moment, everything around seemed to freeze. The sounds of the bustle died down as if by magic, leaving only them, Duke Eric and Immerlin, frozen in an awkward but mesmerizing embrace. Immerlin nodded, but she couldn't utter a word. Her throat was dry, and she felt like her heart was about to jump out of her chest. When she touched the gentleman's chest, she noticed that there was definitely something in his clothes, as if paper was rustling. And out of the corner of her eye, she managed to see that very envelope with documents that she had been looking for a long time in the Duke's office. Immerlin couldn't believe that these were really the same documents that her mother had taken out of the drawer and asked her to take to the police. Exactly, if you think about it. Back then in the Duke's office, Eric's behavior was very suspicious, and that could only mean one thing. What a surprise! The heroine certainly couldn't have imagined that she would find the documents here, judging by the situation. Eric didn't yet know what it was. Immerlin turned to the young man and decided to tell him one funny thing that he certainly didn't suspect. Yes, it was definitely better this way, and this was her chance, her one and only chance, and she had to do it right now. She snatched the envelope from the young man's pocket, and he certainly didn't expect the girl to dare to joke about him like that. Immerlin admitted that there was something the young Duke still didn't know, and she was going to tell him the whole truth. There was only one candle here, and holding the document to the fire, the lady suggested checking something. Eric didn't know what she wanted to do, but he asked the girl to stop behaving like this immediately, because right now she was going to burn important documents. The girl assured that after this, Eric would only be grateful to her, and he really didn't know much about his father. She brought the document to the fire and asked the young man to immediately look at what happened to him when it came into contact with fire. Letters suddenly appeared on the blank sheet of paper, and Eric had no idea that there was some secret hidden there. There was double-entry bookkeeping on paper, and when the lady was managing the books in the South, she learned something about the strange ink, and then discovered that the writing made with that very ink disappeared as if by magic. At high temperatures they become translucent, but unless they get wet, the writing does not wear off, and they were mainly used to write secrets that needed to be carefully hidden. Now in front of Eric was a completely different paper with different numbers, on which was written something about 20 million gold. It may have been used for a secret conspiracy for treason, and there were definitely secret dealings going on here, different from those recorded in the main book. It seemed the Duke was actually up to something with his assistants, and Eric couldn't believe his father could do such a thing. Immerlin hasn't shared all the information yet, and there's one thing to keep in mind when heating invisible ink. It is absolutely necessary to hold your breath and close your mouth, but the young man did not even think about this, and the next second he felt very dizzy. Since Eric was from the Royal Knightly Order, it lasted quite a long time, because usually, if you didn't hold your breath, a person would have long since lost consciousness. She asked Eric to just get some sleep and wake up with full strength. I assure you that in this situation it will definitely be better for everyone. Right now, the young man was ready to fall into a deep sleep, and he realized that Immerlin knew all this in advance, and that he would soon lose consciousness from the dangerous smoke anyway, but the Duke had no idea yet what a crazy woman Immerlin really was. As Eric fell into a deep sleep, he began to dream of something strange. It was a memory of when he once hit his friend. Then the mother tried to understand why the boy hit him, but Eric insisted that he touched his neck. His father said that to tolerate such a thing was the stupidest thing in the world, which is why the boy decided to hit his best friend. Mother said that this is definitely not the way to act. In such cases, you need to talk first, and then respond in kind, which is even more stupid. That day, Eric couldn't understand why his mother was so scared, but he thought that being kind meant being weak, and being weak was bad. His father had always told him that he must not be weak, and it was probably then that his mother's sudden madness began. She asked her son to listen to her carefully, because being kind is not stupid in any way. But the problem is in a world where kind people are not rewarded. Until now, the Duke did not know why he could not forget that moment, her bright brown eyes and the sound of her words, which still hovered in his memory. As soon as the young man opened his eyes, he saw in front of him not his mother, but the smiling face of Immerlin. The young man was sure that he had definitely lost consciousness and assumed that the girl would leave him alone. Now Immerlin stood in front of him. The young man finally woke up, unaware of what the girl was going to do next. And it was not without reason that he thought so, because the gentleman's hands were tied, and he was sitting right in front of the lady on a chair with his wrists tied. The lady chuckled, because the gentleman looked much better than in his clothes, while he angrily asked to be untied immediately. She asked the Duke not to worry because his clothes were lying nearby, and otherwise she would definitely not have been able to carry him to the estate. Even though she bought the handcuffs by tearing off a few gold buttons, it still looked like a kidnapping. Like a robbery, this girl was definitely out of her mind. He asked Immerlin to untie him nicely, and the lady had a strange feeling that she had gotten involved with a cutthroat. The lady showed the Duke a paper with the Duke's seal, but the young man did not know that the hidden content spoke of the princess's political opponent, Prince Robert. It said that the Duke had given him funds to buy private weapons, and the Duke couldn't believe what it all meant. Immerlin understood that the young man knew nothing, but she thought about it for a long time while he was unconscious, and even if he knew nothing, it was all rather strange. After all, Eric stole documents that could have served as a legal basis for blackmailing the Duke, but he hid them and did not hand them over to the royal palace. But even its contents are not enough for an accusation. And then, realizing that the young man did not even suspect its contents, Immerlin realized that the princess had already seen these documents. This means that the princess also doesn't know about its hidden contents, and only the heroine knows about it. So the lady warned her what would happen if she told the princess about this little incident. If the girl didn't want to get into trouble, she needed to untie Eric as soon as possible. Judging by his reaction, she realized that the young man was in a panic and definitely did not want the truth to come out. He assumed the lady wanted something in return from him, money or something like that. He promised to do everything so that Immerlin would first untie him and just talk. The girl had completely different plans. She asked Eric for forgiveness and leaned against him as close as possible. The Duke had absolutely no idea what the girl was doing and asked her to leave immediately. While she was standing right next to him, the next second something strange happened, and the strange thing turned out to be that very sound. Immerlin had only asked the Duke to please help her at least once, and now all the rules were on her side. She was going to take all the shame on herself, so she told Eric not to worry at all while she pressed the camera button. Right now, the Duke heard the sound of a camera, and he understood what the whole situation that Immerlin had just created was leading to. It seemed like a silly trick, but Immerlin asked to imagine a tragic and impossible love story of stepbrother and sister who would soon become relatives. In her opinion, this would be quite enough, that there were people who raised an incredible noise. Now she had photographs. The young man understood how this could all end. There would be a real fuss, or you were definitely not in your right mind to photograph something like this. Everything was necessary for her next plan, so she asked the young man not to get angry while he sat tied up with his shirt unbuttoned. To be honest, the heroine wasn't interested in stupid games for the throne at all. She only needed to protect her family. So if all went well, Immerlin promised to pretend that she knew nothing about the Duke's secret, and Philip's name would also not be mentioned in this situation. Her price was simple. The young man had to prevent the wedding of her mother and his father so that the union could not be concluded. She suggested that the Duke spread a rumor about her, denigrating her in front of her father, who was already not thrilled with their family, and the Duke should definitely believe the words of his son. After this, he needs to quietly inform the Duke that the land on the coast does not actually belong to them, so that they can safely return to the south. The Duke could not believe that making her mother a duchess and taking over the Duke's property was not part of her plans, because he had heard very well that she had done the same thing in her previous marriages. In his eyes, it would have looked exactly like that, but unfortunately, Eric did not know the whole truth, and the reason why the girl was in a hurry to save her family. Family is something that is given from birth, and one day a mother asked her daughter to remember that family is not given from birth, it is created. And it is precisely this kind of created family that must be protected at any cost, no matter what it takes. If her mother hadn't done this one day, their family would have died long ago, and the heroine was ready to tell why she was trying to prevent the marriage. What is going on between his father and Prince Robert is not yet clear, but the young man was surprised when the lady told him that because of his father, their entire family could die. Purchasing weapons for such a large sum could indeed be a problem for the Duke, but the matter was investigated by the royal family. Immerlin was sure that these were not all the documents, and there were still more that she needed to find. There was a half-erased seal on the paper, which means that there is also a reverse side of the document. Eric continued to deny the downsides, and this was the very reality that he was still going to carry on with that naive nonsense. Immerlin was sure that rather than be disgraced and ruined as a family of traitors, she would rather take the shame upon herself and leave quietly, because there were only 2 days left until the wedding. In this situation, you could no longer give him much time, and warned that if Eric did not break off the engagement by tomorrow, the documents would be sent straight to the princess, and the Duke would be published in the newspapers early in the morning. She was about to jump out of the window again, and Eric wondered if she was really going to jump again every time. The heroine had no other choice. There were too many eyes outside, and it was really dangerous to be here. The next second, she jumped out the window. Right at that very moment, the Duke managed to break the magical shackles. Perhaps he could have broken these ropes from the very beginning, but now Immerlin was going to run as far and fast as possible from the evil youth. She actually jumped out of the window again while Eric was trying to catch up with her to grab her. The young man failed and was left with absolutely nothing. I don't understand what this lady is like. He promised not to pursue her, and only wanted her not to risk her life like that again. Did he really care about the man who had just blackmailed him? The heroine couldn't understand whether Eric was really that kind, or simply stupid and naive. The more she got to know him, the more he seemed like a strange man. Unfortunately, when the girl jumped out of the window, she again left her shoe, which remained in the room. She managed to grab the balcony ledge, which meant she could repeat the trick again without any injuries. She still managed to escape, and Eric turned out to be more persistent than she imagined. In the evening, she secretly made her way to her room, but was very surprised when her beloved brother met her. The lady was so frightened that she thought she was seeing a real ghost, because she did not expect to see her brother here in such a state. She got him drunk to the point of unconsciousness in order to find out information about the princess, and naive Philip continued to drink, not noticing anything. He was unhappy that his mother's wedding was in 2 days, but the girl continued to spend the night outside the house, and she was definitely not in her right mind. It turned out that he had been waiting for her in the room all this time, but he had no idea that the heroine had been running all day to save him and her mother. Philip was outraged. His sister walked into a rose that blooms at night, and Immerlin was sure that the day after tomorrow she would become a young duchess. So she said she just wanted to experience the capital's nightlife before she settled into life as a true aristocrat. The brother refused to believe it, because he understood perfectly well what his sister could be like, and she really had just put up with complete nonsense. And it was not without reason that he noticed that his sister had been behaving very strangely lately, while the lady had assured him that she was not up to anything at all. Suddenly, Philip asked if the girl had had some strange dream, and his words were too unexpected. For some reason, right at that moment, the young man suddenly started talking about a dream, and could it be that her brother had the same dream as she had? Noticing that his sister was behaving rather strangely, Philip wanted to find out if she was sleeping poorly, since she would soon become a member of the ducal family, and there was not a drop of joy on her face. Everyone envied them to death, but Immerlin remained dissatisfied, and Larry certainly wasn't going to be happy about such a trifle as a stupid title. None of my mother's men had ever been decent people, but Philip said that they, too, had never considered these people their real family. But at one point, the heroine got tired of all this. She was called a commoner who didn't know her place. Her father was so rude that he always persuaded the girl to listen to his instructions so that she would not want to be punished again. Living a normal life without being pointed at, and Immerlin no longer wanted to be treated that way because it wasn't the most unrealistic wish. So Immerlin confessed to her brother that she just wanted to start living like a human being so that the family wouldn't have any more problems. It was the first time Philip had heard such words from her, and each time he believed that with his mother's new marriage, something would work out. Before everyone could finish the conversation, the heroes heard that someone was definitely standing near the door of the room. It was their mother, and she was outraged that her son and daughter were still not ready. Immerlin admitted that she hadn't heard her mother calling her at all, but she didn't understand what they needed to prepare for now. She had completely forgotten about the royal reception to which they had been invited today, and her mother was already completely ready. The heroine was so focused on breaking off the engagement that she completely forgot that the royal reception she saw in her cider dream was about to begin. Ignoring the disdain of other aristocrats, the Duke proposed to her mother, promising to be united for the rest of their lives. And on the 9th night after she accepted his proposal, she was killed, and Imerlin could not allow her to agree, because from that moment on, the official marriage could only be dissolved with the king's permission. The mother was angry because on such a significant day, both her son and daughter behaved as if they didn't care about anything. She asked Philip to sober up quickly and ordered her daughter to choose a dress for herself and to do it as soon as possible. Lily's maid was always nearby, and the mistress warned that she needed to help her daughter get ready to go out, but the heroine was only going to stop it at all costs. The maid was about to take the dress the heroine had come into the laundry, and Imerlin was trying to figure out what to do. She asked Lilia not to help her, promising that she could handle it herself, but the maid was not going to refuse Madame Helena's request. It was her job, she had to help, but it was in these clothes that the documents that Imerlin had taken from Eric lay. So now she needed to pick up the dress, and she warned the maid again not to help her. Imerlin was most afraid that right now the maid would see that she was standing completely barefoot, and then she would definitely understand that the girl had not spent the night at home. She kindly asked the maid to leave her alone, insisting that she was perfectly fine. Perhaps during this time Lily had managed to notice something, but now she was silent and did not dare to go into details. After the heroine jumped out of the window again, Eric couldn't stop thinking about it for a long time. He thanked the maid for waiting in the next room and asked if she had definitely heard everything. Lily actually managed to overhear the strange conversation because all this time she was waiting near the entrance. She guarded the master all night in case something happened, and did not even intend to tell the princess about it. It was to the princess that she once swore allegiance, and everyone understood perfectly well that she had to tell her about it. But while it was unclear whether this was true or not, and perhaps there was no talk of betrayal here, Lilia was not going to tell anyone anything. Perhaps the Duke was simply up to no good, but what was more important now was getting the documents that Lady Imerlin had taken. That evening, the Duke ordered the maid to keep a better eye on the girl and to thank her. He ordered that Imerlin be followed throughout the day, and that he would see what she was doing and where she was going, and that he would report to the princess when the whole truth was revealed. Even if these documents were a disgrace to the family or a trigger for its demise, the Duke understood that he had to sort everything out first. In any case, he will definitely be able to check the back of the document, the information she is looking for, first. Many have noticed that the young lady has really changed a lot lately. It was impossible to hide. The girl seemed to have become bolder, and in contrast to her passivity in the last few days, she seemed to have a grandiose goal. The maid also noticed this, but Imerlin replied that people change over time, and the same was probably happening to the young Duke. In Lilia's opinion, the Duke remains the same, both then and now, and he is the one whose appearance and inner world completely match. The maid only warned that if the mistress had any difficulties, she could call her at any time. Having heard about the Duke, the girl could not understand whether he was really the man whose words match his actions. It is a well-known fact that Eric enjoyed the princess's favor during his nightly service. The princess handed over part of the mithril mines to the royal family, and having secured her position in the north, she became the main contender for the throne. Eric of Orleans, who was stronger, decided to protect the princess until the very end, but unfortunately his father sided with Prince Robert. Now that Eric knew about this, Merlin wondered if he could continue to maintain the same position. And the young Duke is definitely not the man he claims to be, and at that time something happened in the main building of the Duchy of Orleans. The Duke went hunting in the forest on the estate's grounds, and Eric warned the butler that he was going to rest. Now that his father was gone, he had to check the back of the documents left in the hiding place. The secret room in the secret library must be the reason why his mother left the key in his father's secret, and there was definitely a reason for it. The Duke opened the door to the secret room and decided to make sure that many of Imerlin's words were indeed true. It was so dark here that absolutely nothing could be seen, but it seemed to Eric that there were no certain documents here. He was sure they had to be in a secret drawer, and he had seen for himself that the rest of the documents had definitely been there up until that moment. As soon as he lit the match, he saw something incredible, and even Eric couldn't immediately believe that it was true. With the help of a lit match, he managed to see a hidden inscription written by his mother. She wrote that she would never have committed suicide, and the Duke of Orleans was to blame for everything. Eric managed to read the mysterious message that his mother left before her death, and it was written absolutely truthfully. The words his mother cried out as if in agony were words the young man could not forget when, at the age of 14, he left the duchy because of her. These words were not a curse directed at him, but in fact at that moment she was talking about his father. Besides, he was sure that this handwriting definitely belonged to his mother, and did this mean that she did not take her own life? Today, Eric managed to find out some of the truth about her death, but suddenly he heard that the young men looked very unwell. He grabbed his sword out of fear while in the Duke's office, and there was a man standing right in front of him. It was his father, the Duke, who smirked, wondering if his son was really going to hack his own father to death. To begin with, he asked him to sit down, unless of course he was going to break blood ties because of a few papers that he had managed to hide. The Duke asked whether his son had decided to check the contents of the documents. Knowing his character, he must have already reported everything to the princess. All this time the gentleman had guessed about this because he had heard very well that just yesterday his son had seen the princess herself. He was also able to guess that the princess was definitely behind the machinations to obtain the duchy's ledger, and it was very simple. His father was definitely checking him out. He must have been curious about how much of the footage his son had seen, but Eric had no idea what he should tell and what he should hide. He told me he had found double-entry bookkeeping written in secret ink. His father faltered a little, but perhaps he was now calculating all the steps. Eric said that it was recorded how his father supplied weapons to Prince Robert. Could it be that he was in cahoots with him all this time? The Duke did not deny this fact, but it was not nearly as dangerous as his son had assumed. The gentleman purchased and provided weapons to assist the prince in his expedition to explore new lands in the north next year. He even suggested asking the king himself about this information, since this matter had already received his approval. Judging by his father's confident tone, his words were indeed true, but perhaps he had prepared an excuse in advance, thinking that Eric only knew about the contents of the accounting books. The writing on the wall that he managed to see was a secret message, so the father has no idea that his son now knows the whole truth. During all this time, the princess achieved too much, but she was constantly involved in some kind of scandal. And the Duke did not want Eric to be too close to the princess, because she was not at all someone who was capable of deep feelings, and she would be used by noble families in their political games. The Duke admitted that he would not at all like his family, and especially his only son, to suffer because of this. He also didn't want the young man to suffer because of his mother's madness, but after these words, Eric began to get even angrier. It was as if this story was a source of ridicule and laughter for the father, while his son had spent his entire life thinking that he was to blame for his mother's death. Eric asked, what about Lady Helena, because she certainly doesn't do things to make sure her father doesn't suffer and that he's at peace. The Duke partly agreed with his opinion and admitted that he enjoyed spending time with this girl. The most important thing is that this girl could be useful to the Duke in the future, and he admitted this to his son. He only asked his son to find a mate as soon as possible, but warned the young man to be careful. The Duke assured that his companion would become the next Duchess, who would have access to all the information in this mansion, and of course, he would hardly want a knife stuck in their family's back. At the royal ball, the aristocrats were preparing to celebrate a wonderful occasion, but the Duke of Orleans still had not arrived. The Duke the heroine saw in her dream had come long ago for her mother's sake, but whatever happened, it was unacceptable at this royal party today. Imerlin understood that she had to prevent the Duke of Orleans from proposing to his mother and under no circumstances allow them to get married. As expected, the celebration looked incredibly luxurious, and the table was laden with a variety of treats. Philip looked at the princess with loving eyes, and her appearance was exactly the same as in the rumors. That is why Princess Ella was incredibly popular among the aristocrats, and many men knew her. Philip didn't even imagine, just think, that such a person could become part of the family in the future, and there are rumors that the princess is marrying Eric. Imerlin was sure that these two were connected only by politics, although if we recall their secret meeting in the Night Rose, she could be wrong. It is strange then that on that day Eric left the princess alone and chased after her, and at that moment the butler announced the arrival of the Marquis and his daughters. The lady with whom Amerlin had recently had a huge scandal showed up at the celebration. The girl arrived much earlier, but given her memories, Amerlin was absolutely certain that the Duke of Orleans should have arrived first. In a dream, Vivian began to insult her mother. The heroine always finds a new husband less than a year after the death of the previous one. That evening, the Duke came and saved my mother from Vivian's attacks, who tried to hurt her in every possible way. Because of this, Helena began to trust the Duke completely, but only her daughter knew the whole harsh truth. She tried to find her mother in the crowd of aristocrats with her eyes, and had to prevent and find her before it was too late. Amerlin was about to find her mother, but the next second a huge scarlet stain appeared on her dress right on her chest. It was Lady Vivian, holding an empty glass in her hands and admitting that she had not even noticed how she had spilled it, ruining the girl's dress. There was definitely something wrong here, and now Vivian should have been using it to tease her mother, but for some reason someone else ended up in her angry sights. The girl couldn't forget the scandal Amerlin had caused in the boutique and didn't even apologize, and she even thought she might have decided to get sick. It's quite possible that the future changed because in that very boutique, it was Berlin who grabbed the lady's hair and tore out a whole clump. Does this mean that the Duke has not yet come because of one of her actions, which could very well be true? The heroine thought that if she continued to behave like a scoundrel, she would be able to change the future in which her mother got married. She stated that if the girl wanted to embarrass or intimidate her, then she needed to act much more terrifying, like the scoundrel she was last time. Amerlin asked if Vivian really wanted her to grab her hair again, and her words really did sound crazy. Vivian warned that Amerlin was surrounded by a trail of terrible rumors in the south, and they were probably all true. Be that as it may, her father became famous under another nickname and was called Bluebeard all his life. Rumor had it that the girl personally killed the head of the Violet Guild, and Vivian openly stated this in front of all the aristocrats. The girl couldn't believe it. Could this really be that terrible secret? And she really had personally killed her father. They said the sheriff down south had discovered new facts about Violet's death, and Vivian was sure it looked like more than just rumors. A pearl hairpin was found near the guild leader's body, which definitely belonged to little Amerlin, and she probably almost missed such an important detail. She remembered very well about that very hairpin with a pearl, and it happened when her mother took her and Philip to finally escape from the guild. Then the father called her mother ungrateful and stupid. He was sure she wanted to steal her daughter and all her property. Eventually, the father caught them and noticed them, and the mother was unable to escape quickly with the children, and then something terrible happened. Amerlin didn't understand how she could save her family from her enraged father, and she wondered if she had that same pearl pin in her hair. No matter how hard she tried to remember all the details, this definitely couldn't have happened. The heroine was outraged at where such terrible delusional rumors came from, and how Vivian even dared to speak openly about it. More than 10 years had passed since that terrible day, but the girl suddenly felt that she still couldn't breathe. Vivian insisted that this wasn't all the information she knew. Right now she was going to disgrace the heroine in front of all the aristocrats. She insisted that her mother was going to marry the Duke of Orleans, but someone managed to notice Amerlin in a night rose last night. The same impudent man who had tried to drag her away somewhere appeared in front of her with a sly grin. This man turned out to be the eldest son of the Marquis of Hale, and he was definitely the scoundrel who tried to drag the girl from the night rose. Now he bowed affably and greeted the lady, stating that he certainly did not expect to see her again. As soon as the young man approached her, he immediately felt that he had received a strong blow right on his back. The man winced in pain and sank to his knees, not understanding who had so brazenly dared to come up to him from behind and simply kick him. Mr. Eric appeared in front of him, and he couldn't understand that despite yesterday's refusal, the man was again going to put his sister in an awkward position. It was unexpected, and the future actually changed, so Eric came first, not his father. The man insisted that if a woman came to the night rose alone, it was an unspoken agreement, and he did not receive any refusal at all. Eric stated that his sister was there at the invitation of the princess, who intended to find out information about the South that evening. The princess nodded approvingly, and Eric wondered if the man didn't understand what he had done to the guest who had been invited by the princess herself. And even if she had not been the princess's guest, he still had no right to shift responsibility for his harassment onto the victim. It was that same problematic Gary, true, Last time in another place he behaved just as inappropriately, but in the end he again ended up in a terrible situation. On the one hand, Immerlin understood that the situation had to be resolved in her favor, since the princess herself was now on her side. Old memories kept popping up in her mind, and right now the girl remembered one unpleasant situation. Her mother once assured her that Violet did not die because of her, and all she needed to know was that she was Helena's daughter. But what if she really did kill him then? Her heart was pounding wildly, and could not stop when she heard these words from Vivian. And she didn't even imagine what could happen if everyone heard about the murders and thought that she was the one who killed that person. Immerlin ran out of the ceremonial hall, and Eric immediately went after her because he wanted to save her. The girl looked incredibly upset and ran into the palace garden because she didn't want anyone to see her now. Immerlin tried to cope with her raging emotions, but she could not stop the trembling in her body. For some reason, at that moment, Eric was there again, as if he was her support in the most unexpected situations. The lady asked why the young man decided to follow her, since he certainly did it for a reason. Suddenly, Eric asked the strangest question. Did the girl really know everything? But Immerlin tried to understand what exactly he was talking about. The young man spoke about what was written on the back of the document, and this question had been tormenting him for a long time. Of course, Immerlin knew everything perfectly well. Because of this, she even dreamed about how the Duke would kill her, but she could not tell the whole truth. She said she simply assumed there was information there that could be used to blackmail the Duke. Eric continued to insist that her words were a complete lie, and the girl's behavior was proof of the opposite, and she always pretended that she didn't know anything, and when necessary, she shamelessly threatened. For some reason, Eric suddenly became really heated up, and the lady noticed that he certainly wasn't always like this, but from that moment on, he asked her to stop. Because from that moment on, he was going to face reality and find out where the truth really lay. He asked Immerlin not to think that he was going to leave it at that, because her actions were too mysterious. Lady Vivian said something familiar, that a hairpin was found at the scene of the guild leader's death, and Eric asked what would happen if he told the sheriff of the South that Immerlin was its owner. He could also say that the girl, in order to take possession of Violet's enormous inheritance, conspired with Helena to kill him and get half of the inheritance. And probably the sheriff, blinded by the thirst for fame, will fabricate even more evidence to make the girl look guilty. It sounded like a threat, and the lady screamed, wondering if the young man was trying to take revenge on her for the last time. She couldn't help but say that now she saw that her son and his father were absolutely identical. Eric didn't consider himself a copy of his father, and asked if the lady really thought that his father didn't know about this, and didn't she understand why he didn't react in any way. The Duke intended to use this as a leash to drag the girl and her family back, even if they suddenly tried to escape. This was not all the information that Eric knew, and he wanted to convey the whole truth. Holding her hands, the young man confessed that the Duke would kill them, just as he had once mercilessly killed his own mother. Immerlin could not believe that Eric had actually found out that his own father had killed his beloved mother. Eric warned him, so he too would stop pretending to be good and side with the villain, but he couldn't do that now. So he decided to personally talk to Immerlin to understand what goals were driving her to do something like this. None of the heroes expected the truth to be revealed so soon, and the Duke offered the girl his help because now it was about her. At present, there are two great dukes on the continent who have had great influence in the empire. One of them is the great ducal family of Gerda, with military power on the border, and the other is the ducal family of Orleans, an ally of the king and the owner of enormous wealth. Rumors will soon begin to circulate that the Duke of Orleans is in love with a low-born widow, and the public will believe that she is using the naive Duke to enhance her status. But it was definitely about Helena, but there is one more thing that people get wrong. In fact, the Duke did not fall in love with her, and on the day she first met him at that ball, she must have seemed weak to him. The Duke approached the girl, saying that he fell in love with her at first sight. For Helena, it was just an obvious lie. The Duke suffered from protagonist syndrome and was not bound by the conventions of status. Well, for Helen it was even better, and narcissistic people are much easier to use. Despite the fact that the Duke turned out to be very handsome, Helena intended to use him for her own personal purposes. She decided to go out for some fresh air, and it seems she did so just in time for the Duke himself to arrive. That evening the man really thought it was like fate, and his speech was incredibly sweet. Helen suggested getting some fresh air before entering the event, but at that moment the Duke's assistant arrived. He whispered something in his ear, and after these words the Duke's face changed. He asked Helena to go inside first, saying that he urgently needed to find someone. Helena assumed it was probably because of Madame Margaret, but she also knew her very well and suggested that the Duke go with her to say hello. The gentleman confidently declared that he should greet Madame alone and that this was his last word. Even though she wants to go with Helena, it concerns matters that will be foreign to her. The lady promised to wait patiently for the Duke and really hoped that he would return very soon. But Helena felt that something strange was going on here and that the Duke was not telling her everything. And it was so strange that Helena realized she was ready to reconsider her decision about her engagement to the Duke, and she was overcome by a feeling that she believed impeccably, but she believed her intuition even more. Duke Eric invited the girl to stand by his side, and his words sounded more confident and serious than ever. He offered to help Immerlin and continued to stand in front of her with his hand outstretched, while the lady was completely perplexed. Eric admitted that he needed to check something, and judging by the girl's reaction, it seems that she knows what is written on the back of the document, and this time the heroine really showed too clearly that she knows secret information. Eric assumed that the information was probably provided by an informant and asked if the lady knew the real reason why his father wanted to marry her mother. Immerlin couldn't say that she knew the truth, but under the current laws of the continent, even if their family devoted themselves to the duchy, they would still have no right of inheritance. Surely this will help the Duke use them for various purposes, which means her informant couldn't get any further, and it seems Eric believed her story. Besides the main reason that the girl named, the purpose of this marriage was to find the mysterious grave of mermaids, about which there were many legends. Indeed, the mysterious grave was located on land inherited by the Immerlin family, and the Duke realized this. The mermaid's tomb was the burial place of monastones of great value, into which the bodies of mermaids who lived in ancient times were transformed, and the royal family had a legend associated with this land. The story begins on the day when young George von Dennick, the future first monarch, was sailing in the Southern Sea and accidentally fell into the water. He was considered missing for a long time, but was found alive in one of the southern regions, and told people that all this time he had been cared for by strange mermaids. Having gone to the place on George's orders, people discovered huge stones of very high purity, and thus rumors about one legend arose. Manna stones are the bodies of mermaids, and George was cared for by the spirits of long-dead mermaids, so he received their blessing, conquered the continent of Hellenia, which was ruled by another family, and founded the Dennick dynasty. Because of this, the symbolic story that the one who finds the graves of the mermaids will become king made princes and princesses go crazy in search of the deposit of magic stones. The land that the Wedgwood family so coveted was an ordinary deserted coastline, devoid of any life or civilization. Immerlin said that, moreover, due to the enormous debts for which it was mortgaged, it is not even known who will end up with it. In this case, even if the owner is found and the rights are returned, due to land deals concluded by dissolute aristocrats of the past, it will be impossible to re-register the ownership rights for several years. And perhaps the reason the Duke killed the entire family was because he decided it would be easier to kill these people and thus take over the property rights. This meant that the Duke of Orléans would be able to kill the family for his own selfish plans, and this was indeed the very reason that Immerlin had not guessed. The Duke had killed his son's beloved mother, Eric assumed. If all this was truly terrible, his father must certainly be punished. Immerlin wondered if the Duke was going to tell the whole world about this, but it wouldn't end with him simply stopping his father and helping their family escape as payment for his silence. The man who committed the crime definitely had to be punished, and the girl couldn't understand what Eric meant when he offered to take his side. The Duke's principles were that evil must be defeated with evil, and he had long since grown tired of showing his good side since he could not defeat evil in this way. And as far as the young man could see, there was no more suitable villain than Immerlin, who would definitely be able to help him in this situation. Therefore, the young man suggested that perhaps he was ready to become the same villain as she was, just to honor the memory of his mother and punish the main villains. Suddenly, Immerlin noticed the same lighting that the Duke had prepared for his dramatic proposal to her mother, and at that moment, Eric dropped to one knee. The young man saw no other way to prevent his father from obtaining the coastal document or the lady from stopping her mother's wedding, and Imerlin understood what his plan was. Inside, on a pillow of white silk, rested a ring, the family jewel of the Eric family, a symbol of love and power. The diamond in the center of the ring sparkled in the rays of the rising sun, as if reflecting the determination in the Duke's eyes. He took a deep breath, opened the box, and quietly whispered whether Imerlin was ready to become his wife. Eric knew his proposal would be met with controversy, but he was prepared for any consequences. Her heart began to beat faster, and her head was filled with thousands of questions that needed urgent answers in order to make the right decision. Her eyes reflected mistrust, mixed with timid hope. She had always admired Duke Eric, his strength, justice, and uncompromising fight against those who abused their power. Certainly the wedding should have helped her, but the lady could not believe it. And did the Duke really want her to become the daughter-in-law of their common future worst enemy? It was the only way to stop his father's wedding, and Eric's father probably knows a lot more of the family's secrets, and if he breaks off the engagement and just runs away, his father will definitely never leave him alone. Although the Duke had killed the girl's entire family with particular ease in his dream, she understood that this man was truly capable of much. Eric promised that as long as he didn't reveal his father's secrets, this marriage would help protect the girl's family, and he suggested that she think of it as a kind of contract. Imerlin certainly didn't even think about it, and besides, it all happened too suddenly. Eric began to worry and wanted to do everything as quickly as possible, because if the lady was going to enter into a contract with him, she had to accept this ring. This was the only chance left for the girl, and Eric was indeed right to propose to her. But to finally get permission, the heroes went to meet the princess. The lady had certainly never been in a situation like this before, but now she had to ask the princess to give her the Duke. Eric initially warned her that she needed to get the princess's permission, but when she fell to her knees before the lady, he admitted that this was not what they had come here for. The princess laughed and asked if this girl was as passionate as the color of her hair, but she had no idea why she needed this gentleman. Imerlin admitted that she was actually just going to use him for her own purposes and return him back as if he were a thing. The princess was well aware that the lady needed him for some reason and asked Imerlin to tell her directly what was going on here. Since she has already ruined the happy moment, her reasoned explanation must be more convincing than ever, because her answer should please the lady even more. The princess's self-confident behavior on the one hand irritated the Duke, because in this situation he looked like a thing. Eric asked if Imerlin had brought the documents he had spoken of, but the people were afraid that these documents could really be shown to the princess herself. The young man assured her that the princess should definitely know about these documents as well, and the lady handed him an important envelope. No one knew whether the princess could really be trusted, nor could anyone predict what she would do. She studied the mysterious document in detail and admitted that she had thought quite highly of the Duke, but he turned out to be a complete disappointment. But she also did not understand why Eric was acting this way. These documents could serve as evidence of treason on the part of their ducal family, as Robert certainly used them to seize the imperial treasury. It would have been possible to hide it further, and Eric understood perfectly well that in this situation he had to act exactly like that. So he decided to tell the truth, and his loyalty was clear to the princess, and this answer was, in her opinion, quite sufficient. Imerlin asked if the princess was really going to hand over important documents to the king in order to finally reveal the terrible truth about the Duke. If the princess investigates the Duke, who is formally an ally of His Majesty, and makes a verdict of treason, everything could turn against her. So there was absolutely no time for this, but Eric warned that the day after tomorrow morning, the grave of the mermaids could go to his father. He said that the land that Baron Wedgwood left behind after his death was the very grave of the mermaids, which is why the Duke so wants to marry Lady Helena. This was definitely not to be allowed, and the princess joked that perhaps she should marry Imerlin herself. Everyone understood perfectly well that the temple would not approve of this, and under continental law, the right of inheritance is not recognized for children from a second marriage. The princess realized that the old counselors were unlikely to give permission, but Eric and Imerlin's parents were already supposedly engaged. If the marriage license is obtained from the princess, the temple will not be able to refuse, and if they also throw in a little money, then everything can work out wonderfully. After hearing this story, the princess happily agreed to write the marriage license and asked the servant to bring her a pen and paper. Mistress Ella warned the girl that for now it would be better for her to wear other clothes, and happily asked the maid to bring new clothes and even shoes. With her own hand, the princess signed an important document that gave full consent to the marriage between the Duke and this girl. She didn't doubt her decision one bit, because she understood that everything was being done for the good of the world to finally deal with the main villains. The lady only once decided to ask Eric if he knew why she had given her consent so easily. Initially, Eric assumed that perhaps everything was being done from the grave of those very mermaids, but the princess would hardly have agreed to this. For her, the legend about some mysterious land was absolutely unimportant, and whether Robert, having taken this land, could subsequently encroach on the throne. She admitted that Eric knew perfectly well that Robert had no abilities, and her abilities were too outstanding. Of course, for the princess, the legend of magical mermaids was just fiction, and Eric could not even understand why she agreed to this marriage. At the same time, a pair of beautiful shoes were brought to the dressing room by the maid, who asked Duke Eric to give them to Lady Immerlin. One of these shoes was incredibly similar to the one she dropped at the hotel, and the Duke even picked up a second identical shoe. This gesture was so incredibly sweet that the heroine began to smile involuntarily, and a slight blush appeared on her cheeks. Eric of Orleans, the more she learned about him, the stranger he seemed to her. Then he asks her not to run away, because he is worried. He takes her word for it, even though the girl was blackmailing him, and instead of blackmailing her in return, he unexpectedly prepared a ring for a fictitious marriage. The heroine would never be able to live as honestly as Eric of Orleans, but she was definitely ready to keep one promise. And even if it was usually a fictitious marriage, since the Duke had already become part of her family, she was ready to do anything. Immerlin made an important decision and promised herself to also protect the Duke because he offered her his help. And no matter what, the girl decided to perfectly fulfill her role as a fictitious bride in order to save the family. Eric was speechless. Before him stood not just the Baron's daughter, but a real queen, capable of captivating hearts and ruling kingdoms with just one glance. For the first time in a long time, Duke Eric felt his heart respond to something more than just duty and honor. Legends about the mermaid's grave and the like are certainly interesting, but the princess liked to play other games. Now she was incredibly interested in the love story between Duke Eric and an ordinary girl, Immerlin, who fought to save her family. It was here that class differences were overcome and marriage was concluded. An hour later, on a mysterious evening, an important dialogue took place in the luxurious chambers of the princess's palace. It was not without reason that she arranged to meet with the Duke of Orleans in order to finally get answers to her questions. So it was the Duke who had been plotting behind her back with Prince Robert, targeting the mermaid's tomb, and it was absolutely true. Now the princess knew the facts and many details, and she understood perfectly well what these two were planning. If it weren't for Eric and you, the important documents, she would have lost the mermaid's tomb right under her nose. So the princess played a different game, and that evening she was going to meet the Duke himself, who was indeed hiding a lot from her. This man was as cunning as a sinister fox, and the girl was well aware of this, but she wanted to overcome this evil. Having enormous influence and power, the princess was never afraid of anything and was ready to enter into conflict even with the most high-ranking person. Today she had arranged to meet the Duke. He was late. It was not like him at all. The young man admitted that he was a little delayed on the way. The princess was not talking about the reception, but about Madame Margaret's business rights, and immediately told the Duke that he had definitely missed something. The man stated that when he proposed going into the leather business, he heard that the lady was already planning to start a business with the princess, and what she now heard was indeed a little different from the truth. They say the Duke proposed not only a wine business, but also the construction of a factory in the south, but he hardly thought about how he was going to get land and electricity. The Duke didn't have any precise plans yet, but electricity wasn't a requirement. The continent had outstanding magical engineers and magical stones. It is not surprising that the Duke was eager to obtain the Tomb of the Mermaids, and this matter was just right for the Duke, who was so concerned about his aristocratic reputation. The princess admitted that if the gentleman had been sincere in his intentions all this time, she would have behaved differently, despite his devotion. She suggested that in order to strengthen their relationship, he should give her his son, the Duke, and the man would of course be happy to arrange his engagement. He was sure that his son would refuse if he himself did not want it, not even suspecting that his son had long since gotten out of his control, and only the princess knew this. Just think, he chose Prince Robert over the princess to escape the interference of the royal family, as expected. Before the meeting he pretended not to suspect anything. And Eric, who everyone considered stupid, managed to deceive his own father, and this was certainly a striking change on his part. Soon after, the princess decided to visit an influential lady named Margaret Beaufort. The girl asked sarcastically, who would grab the most reliable lifeline on the entire continent. It seemed that Eric had changed thanks to that young lady. The huge stained glass windows, which usually let in the sun's rays, now seemed to convey the purple melancholy of the sunset. Eric suggested that Immerlin take another photo, but the lady didn't understand why this was necessary, since they had one photo together from their hotel room. That's why the Duke decided to suggest this. Since they were going to publish it in the newspaper, it would probably be better to take a more decent photo. While they were discussing what a decent photograph should be like, a girl was just walking into the office. It was Lily. She said that a photo of the lovers would be just right, where they would be leisurely strolling on such a night. And this girl turned out to be not a maid at all, but a real royal knight. Only now did Immerlin finally find out about this. She was sure that appearance should correspond to content. All this time, Eric carefully concealed the fact that the maid was a worthy knight. Lily always helped him, and this time she also offered to take a photo of the lovers to send to the newspapers. Be that as it may, the heroes were going to film a date scene, but now they were standing too far from each other, and this is definitely not how a couple in love can look. Lily held the camera and was getting ready to take that wonderful shot, asking the subjects to come closer to each other. Immerlin happily took the Duke's arm, and this was her first touch, so Eric was incredibly embarrassed. For him, this distance was too close, and Immerlin realized that if this continued, it would be better to use the photo from the hotel. Eric only assumed that perhaps the girl might regret it, and because of her damaged reputation, it might be difficult for her to get married again in the future. For Immerlin, marriage was not so important, but for a man like Eric, it is a serious matter. He can increase the authority of the ducal house through an alliance with other aristocratic families. If he marries the princess, he will gain the highest position in this country. Merlin understood perfectly well. Perhaps Eric is simply worried about his reputation. Eric, in turn, pressed her closer to himself, trying to hide the trembling of excitement under a mask of self-confidence. The photo was meant to be a symbol of their unusual union, a confirmation of their sudden passion for everyone watching them from behind the scenes. They understood that this theater had to convince not only the court, but also the Duke himself. The more believable their romance was, the more chances they would have of winning. Immerlin asked the Duke to smile sweetly, because photographs turn out much better when people in them are smiling sincerely. A flash of light, and Lily nodded contentedly, capturing the perfect moment. The lovers looking at each other with tenderness in their eyes, their silhouettes blending against the sunset. Finally, the loving photo session was over, and the heroes headed back home in the dark twilight. The Duke looked at the photographic film with interest, and it was a truly amazing invention that created an image using only light. Lily decided to ask if the gentleman was really going to marry Lady Immerlin, since they had already received the princess's permission. The lady turned to the gentleman and wanted to find out the reason for such an act, because Lady Immerlin is not an ordinary girl at all. She was suspected of complicity with her mother in the murder of the head of the merchant guild, and Eric could not believe it. Trusting his feelings, the young man realized that, judging by her behavior in the office, she definitely could not be anything but an accomplice, even an assistant. At the time, the head of the merchant guild was killed, and Immerlin was only 12 years old. Given the circumstances, it is more reasonable to suspect Madame Helena. Even despite Lily's words, the young man was absolutely sure that Immerlin was not his enemy. The lady asked if the gentleman really believed so desperately that the Duke had committed treason, and as a son, he should probably trust him. Duke Eric had already decided to take Immerlin by the hand in the face of the enemy. It was more effective to hide his suspicions about his allies. In addition, he asked Lily to send Immerlin a check for 100,000 gold, and this is the money he promised to give her for wedding preparations. Perhaps Immerlin will take all the money and disappear without a trace, but if that happens, their cooperation will come to an end once and for all. This is even a good opportunity to find out whether this girl is really an enemy or a true loyal ally. If Imerlin escaped, it would be proof that there was definitely something wrong with their connection, and now Eric wondered what choice the lady would make. It was amazing, Margaret wrote an autobiography, and they say that at the party in honor of its publication, she will announce a new business that will shake up the continent. It is said that the income from Lady Margaret's department store exceeded even that of a decent duke, and Monsieur d'Orléans truly considered her an outstanding person. The venerable King of Denica, Melsas Munir Van, had a slightly different opinion. However, money earned in the department store and money received from the lands are two different things. At the meeting with the Duke, the men discussed income from the lands, and the king was indeed right. However, the Duke wondered if this was the reason why many people had not started making a living, and this was a value that the princess had repeatedly insisted on, her voice breaking. Ella certainly lacked the dignity of a princess, but she was sensitive to change, and her bold investment sense surpassed anyone else's. However, the throne could not be taken just because of this place, which should protect from the traditional authority of the dynasty. For the last several hundred years, there has not been a single queen. A strategic mind, the ability to invest successfully, her enterprise would be good if Prince Robert had at least one of these qualities. The king was sure that perhaps Robert would also appreciate the conditions and dignity, because he was definitely similar to him. The man hoped that the prince would gain a lot from this adventure in the north, and he was going to give him all possible support. The Duke had long since taken the prince's side. He was sure that it was his duty to defeat other races and dangerous demons. Waldeck always had the look of a predator targeting his prey, but as long as the king didn't become his enemy, there shouldn't be any problems. If Robert missed this opportunity too, the king knew full well he would have to side with the princess. This morning was especially pleasant for the heroine Imerlin, and today the sun seemed to shine even brighter, because in her hands was a check for a whole 100,000 gold coins, and just think, such a huge sum could fit on a small, shiny piece of paper. Lily warned that Eric gave this money for wedding preparations because he could not break his promise. Philip was already waiting for his sister, who for some reason was still not ready, and early in the morning they agreed to go see the temple for their mother's wedding. Imerlin definitely didn't want to go anywhere today. Her brother said the Duke would be coming too, and she should go and make a good impression on him. If the lady refused, Mother would start nagging her again, so she had no choice but to agree. And since that was how it turned out, Imerlin was going to meet her worst enemy in the temple in order to find fault with him in this situation. A priest from a side branch of the Orleans family had already arrived at the temple to lead the heroes to the ceremony site and show them everything. The priest was very glad that the Duke was tying himself to such good people, since he had long been a member of the Orleans family. For some reason, neither Imerlin nor her mother had yet met the Duke, and this was abnormal, as if the groom had disappeared without a trace. Mother assured me that they said he was busy, but the Duke had already donated 4 million gold to the capital diocese through this priest. Hearing this amount, Imerlin could not believe at all that he had given such a large sum of money in order for the wedding to take place. Recently, Eric warned that he was going to meet with the priest where the wedding would take place and also ask him for assistance. Eric said he would negotiate with the priest, but would this religious and straightforward man be able to cope with his tasks? If the hierarchy received such a huge sum, it is unlikely that anyone would dare to decide wedding matters on their own. Imerlin was indignant, because if the Duke had so much extra money, they would have been better off giving it to the family, because people would still divide it equally among themselves. After these words, her mother angrily stepped on her daughter's foot so that she wouldn't accidentally say anything unnecessary. Imerlin screamed in surprise, and her mother apologized for the noise, admitting that everything was perfectly fine with her daughter. She had noticed for a long time that her daughter had been behaving more and more strangely lately, and asked if she didn't like the fact that she had decided to get married. Hearing this question, Merlin thought for a moment, but from her facial expression it was clear that she was not happy at all. She was so absorbed in her thoughts about the upcoming wedding that she didn't even notice how her mother asked her to look straight at her. Helena did indeed find the Duke a little strange, and sometimes a little hypocritical, and even she sometimes doubted whether she should enter into this marriage. But she was sure that in this cruel world, it is impossible to find a non-strange person in whom you can be completely confident. She stroked her beloved daughter's face and admitted that, if you look from the outside, they are all a little strange too. In a family, you need to understand such things, and the mother was sure that her daughter would still understand her in the future and approve of this union. No matter how much she tried to ask her to understand, the heroine understood only one thing, that because of the Duke, she could lose her family. Perhaps she too will be able to be understood someday, because neither her mother nor her brother know the future. And maybe Mother will understand that if she really killed Bluebeard, then she must understand why the Duke is not worthy of becoming a part of her life. While the priest and his brother were discussing the details of the wedding, the young man invited everyone to go inside to have a look around. In one of the photographs, Immerlin noticed a priest from the capital's hierarchy, and all these people were incredibly religious. While she was looking at the photographs, she noticed that the person in the center of the photograph had a definitely familiar face. The heroine tried to remember where she had seen the fair-haired young man before, because his face was definitely familiar to her. Indeed, she had seen him in a photograph in the newspaper that Philip had recently shown her, and they had written there that a priest had a son who turned out to be a criminal, and he was hidden in a boarding school. Immerlin decided to ask the priest if the man in the photograph was really the same young man, Andrea, whom everyone called a very religious man. This future probably hadn't happened yet, and Immerlin understood that in that case she would have to act a little differently. Eric hoped that tomorrow's negotiations with Father Andrea would be successful, and he had warned the lady about this a couple of days before. The heroine managed to find a mysterious secret that would definitely shock the priest, and after that he would be on their side. Having run out of the church, the lady ordered the coachman to go as quickly as possible to the boarding school at the capital diocese. Literally that day, Eric arranged a meeting with Andrea, but he was adamant and did not intend to interfere with the sacred wedding. Eric explained that he and his fiancée had received permission to marry before his father and Lady Helena, and he wanted Andrea to help him. The Duke played his part beautifully, insisting that he could not lose his beloved woman just like that by accident, and it was a touching and sad story. Andrea warned him that he couldn't do what he wasn't going to do, and suggested that the Duke not think about buying him with money. The priest rejected both the appeal to emotion and the donations, and the Duke could not believe that he could do nothing in this situation. While he was trying to persuade the priest, his assistant suddenly ran into the temple and asked Eric to forgive her for such an urgent arrival. It was Lady Lily, and judging by her worried face, something had happened in preparation for the wedding. Approaching the gentleman, she whispered important information into his ear that he definitely needed to know right now, and it seemed that Lady Immerlin had escaped. Time passed. Immerlin had disappeared about 4 hours ago. The Duke had no idea where she could have gone. He gave her a whole 100,000 gold pieces, taking a huge amount of money. She did not come to the appointed place, and this could only mean one thing. Eric couldn't believe that she had gotten close to him from the very beginning, solely for the sake of money, but perhaps she wouldn't have run away at all he could do was wait. Lily also insisted that it was time to tell Helena and Philip something, but Eric warned that they only needed a little time. Andrea warned that he was completely powerless in this situation, and the man would not agree to any tricks. The Duke understood that he had only one chance, and he was ready to persuade the priest right now. He fell on his knees before him to show his true intentions and to be a noble gentleman in Andrea's eyes. He let go of his head and turned to Andrea, asking for forgiveness for such an impudent request, but Eric had only one request. The high-ranking aristocrat fell on his knees, which was very difficult for the priest, and his only family, the goddess, had already commanded the sanctity of marriage. Eric understood perfectly well that Andrea was no priest at all, because he had too many mistresses, and besides, for some reason he was completely adamant. It was forbidden to enter the temple without permission, but at that moment screams were heard in the main hall. A young boy appeared on the threshold of the huge doors, shouting for his father to help him immediately. He ran to Andrea, who turned out to be his father, but priests were strictly forbidden to marry. Lady Immerlin was already rushing to the rescue, wanting to tell the whole truth about the priest and continue blackmailing him. The Duke heard a familiar voice and immediately realized that it belonged to Lady Immerlin, but for some reason she suddenly appeared in the temple. The lady loudly declared that because of the Duke she had suffered incredibly with the search, and now she looked like a treacherous villain. Earlier, Immerlin had ordered the Duke to settle everything with money, but now she loudly asked why Eric continued to talk to him. The priest had never expected his family truth to be revealed, and now he was at a complete disadvantage. Firstly, the young man admitted that everything that had happened was a huge misunderstanding, and he understood that he should explain himself to the Duke. Unfortunately, Immerlin didn't want to listen to his stupid excuses any longer and slammed her fist on the table with all her might. The priest had already received a large sum of money from the church's grant capital, but the priest insisted that this money was donated in the name of faith. Immerlin asked if it wasn't with this money that he sent his son, who shouldn't be with a priest, to a boarding school apparently. He still hadn't gotten rid of his habit of chattering. Andrea slowly started to get angry and said that their parents were already so close that they were about to get married, and they dared to threaten him. After all, if the Duke found out that his son was doing this, he could break the blood ties, but in fact, Andrea decided to first get rid of the Duke and his son. Immerlin asked Eric to do something because the situation was getting too tense. It seemed that Andrea had almost given up, and Eric wondered what he could scare him with one last time so that he would finally agree. Suddenly, he came up to the light and hit him in the face, and Immerlin looked at Eric in surprise. She just asked him to do something, so Eric walked up to him and just knocked the priest out so he wouldn't say any more stupid things. Immerlin thought that kidnapping the priest in such a state would also be a good option, and the Duke definitely agreed with her. Right now, they were going to kidnap Andrea from the temple and escape, and for some reason Eric became too accommodating from that moment on. But this was not like him at all. Immerlin asked if Eric had done something wrong to her, and since they were in the temple, she asked him to answer her question honestly. Eric really did suspect her when she suddenly disappeared, and he thought the lady had run away with all the money, and while she had been working hard for 4 hours, all this time Erica had thought she was a runaway. They were in the same boat, and Immerlin was outraged that he thought so, but Eric immediately apologized sincerely for his suspicions. At that moment, the priest wheezed something and grabbed his head, on which there was a huge bump. Before he could come to his senses, Eric threatened him again so that Andrea would not even think about following another plan. Eric asked the girl if they could definitely trust each other from now on, because who else would he do this with if not with her? What's more important now is that they were able to achieve their goal, and Eric spoke kind words like never before. He asked the girl and really hoped that she had not planned the kidnapping from the very beginning. And all this time Lily was with them, and Immerlin decided to turn to her so that she would notify her mother. She gave the girl the envelopes and warned her that if her mother came looking for her, she should show her this envelope and say that she found it in the room. The contents of the letter were known only to Immerlin, and she smiled and stated that it was definitely classified information. Tomorrow morning she would have to suddenly disappear for their sham marriage. She was sure it would definitely work. In the note, Immerlin wrote that in fact, 2 days ago at a party, she met a particularly interesting man with whom she fell head over heels in love at first sight. She specifically wrote a letter about how she had recently fallen in love with a man who looked exactly like the play's main character. She described the man's sweet smile and, most importantly, how incredibly kind he was to her. Immerlin wrote that when she is near him, I am not afraid of him, not the darkness, not narrow spaces. He is not at all like other people. If she had such a person, her life would be completely different. And at the end, she said something. It was about an unexpected pregnancy, and after reading this letter, Helena did not understand at all what it all meant. All this time, Lily watched as the lady read the letter, and how, from an ordinary girl, a strong thirst for blood emanated from her. She asked her mother not to interfere with the wedding preparations and promised that she would return very soon. Helena told the maid that her girl said she wanted to get some fresh air and live a happy life. She asked to postpone the meeting with the Duke for about 30 minutes to consider the contents of the letter. Unexpectedly, the lady asked if the maid had ever raised her own daughter. The relationship between mother and daughter will always be simple, and she must have been very upset that her mother was getting married and even ran away from this house. Helena smiled and said that it was still not good to ruin the reputation of the Immerlin family over such trifles. The mother understood perfectly well that her daughter had written this letter for a reason, but she could not think of anything at all to justify her. Based on her intuition, she knew only one thing for sure: this treacherous girl was definitely up to something. During the time when Helena lived in the Viscount's house, she often went to the theater with her children, and one day they saw the play Thumbelina and the Prince. A little princess living in a village was kidnapped by a toad and went through many adventures, eventually meeting a prince just like her and falling head over heels in love with him. It was a normal trip to the theater, but suddenly Helena noticed her daughter's unusual behavior, and she was definitely looking at something. Suddenly, Immerlin, who had been quiet all this time, stopped in front of a photograph of an actor who played the little prince, a half-breed dwarf, and did not particularly stand out on stage. For Helena, this actor was too short to be called handsome, but Immerlin liked him for this reason because he was small. Then she wondered why the child, who had no interest in the opposite sex, suddenly showed such interest. In fact, the girl had always been afraid of tall men, but then her mother realized that she still couldn't escape their past, and the day before the wedding, something happened in the Duke's mansion. Eric met Mrs. Helena, and he heard that the lady had come to dine with her father, wishing her a good time. Helena immediately understood something about Eric. He was the son of a Grand Duke, but for some reason everything was definitely fine with this man. She said he was incredibly similar to the main character in the play she had shown to the children for the first time, and he had made the same wonderful impression. Immerlin was still afraid of tall men with the exception of Philip, and Mother, looking at the Duke, thought about what it was about this man that made her daughter change radically. She showed this letter to Philip, and if the girl had been so worried about her mother's wedding, she certainly would not have left home the day before the wedding. Immerlin's words sounded like, if you want your wedding to go well, you don't have to look for it at all. Philip said that Immerlin was rumored to have met Duke Eric in the Night Rose, although she had never been particularly interested in men in the South before. Perplexed, Philip realized that it was precisely on that day when Immerlin returned and spent the night outside the house that she met her love. He said these words by accident, but Helena had no idea that her daughter had once stayed home overnight and asked her brother to explain everything. The long-awaited wedding day had finally arrived, but Helena felt uneasy, and she really wanted to talk to her daughter. The Duke approached her and asked how the lady was going to deal with the consequences of this chaos. Perhaps they would first need to go to a secluded place. Not only Helena was sad on her wedding day, but the same feeling also haunted the priest Andrea. The terrible truth was known about the priest. He broke his vow of chastity by sending his own son to study at a boarding school. Duke Eric had already told this information to many, and it was radically different from what he had said before. The young man was sure that if a priest broke his oath, he should be punished, and even in such bad deeds there was a special morality. Most of all, his father did not understand what was going on here, and having pushed his way through the crowd of guests, he was determined to talk to his son. Immerlin turned to the Duke so that he would have time to listen to them, but everyone understood that it was too late to explain anything. There was absolutely no time left for arguments, and Eric only whispered in the girl's ear that they needed to escape right now. She was sure that everything would be over in the next few minutes, but the son of the Grand Duke certainly did not think so, because the most important condition of the marriage had not yet been fulfilled. There is a marriage contract written before the Dukes. Their photographs should have already appeared in the morning newspaper, and they even successfully carried out the ceremony. All this could be cancelled at any time until the first wedding night, which the Duke announced. He gave the order to seize his son as quickly as possible, and the knights didn't care at all that they were in the temple. The Duke was confident that everything was for the sake of protecting the sacred central temple and the power of His Majesty the King, and if any problems arose, he promised to solve them. Immerlin felt safe in the dire situation, and Eric warned that when he drew his sword, the girl should hide behind the altar. After all, Eric was going to defeat the hated evil, and in that case he was ready to defend what had now become dear to him. Hiding behind the altar, the lady could not believe that father and son would really start fighting right during the wedding ceremony. While she was trying to hide, she noticed Father Andrea, and for some reason he was still there, probably unable to escape due to questions. The young man asked Immerlin how she could not keep her promise, since it was because of them that he was unable to protect his own honor or the honor of his son. Confused, Andrea was sure that if this treacherous lady had not appeared in his life, he would still have been able to hide his deception. All this time, the heroine thought that for some reason everything was going too smoothly, but if the priest hit her with a weapon, she would die right now. Immerlin closed her eyes and decided that if she was going to hell, she would do so with everyone who had tormented her family all their lives. The fist crunched into the traitor's jaw, knocking him off his feet, rage seething in Philip's blood, clouding his mind. He saw only Andrea's bloody face, distorted with anger and surprise, and he knew that he had done the right thing. Now there was no trace of it left before him, was only a traitor threatening the most precious thing he had. Philip was incredibly angry when he saw that the priest was going to hit the girl, and in an angry voice he warned that he was ready to deal with even him. The knights were about to pounce on the lady and his brother, but suddenly he stood right in front of her and ordered all the knights to stop. Shielding his sister with his body, the young man declared that this girl was pregnant and that she definitely could not be treated like that. Philip looked truly crazy, and for some reason he said these words here and now, which were written in the letter. The Duke of Orleans was the first to hear about this, and he could not believe that this girl was really pregnant. Philip's desire to protect his family was commendable, but the Duke said that in such a situation, lying was even more unacceptable. Mother Helena, with tears in her eyes, said that her daughter had disappeared, leaving only a note about her pregnancy, so she had been very worried all this time. Waldeck looked at his future wife with distrust and declared that if his grandson was in her belly, then of course he should accept her. But what was unexpected was that they had a marriage contract that was personally drawn up by His Majesty the Emperor, which no one could go against. There was complete chaos in the temple, and the Duke, with a sinister smile, declared that it would probably be better to ask His Majesty the Emperor personally about everything in order for this marriage to be valid.